Уважаеми колеги,
Esteemed colleagues, esteemed speakers, dear guests, allow me to open today's meeting by thanking every one of you for being here. Today's meeting has brought together over 130 members of parliament from the 27 national parliaments of the European Union. I'd like to thank personally Claude Moraes for his direct involvement in the preparation of today's meeting in the context of the parliamentary dimension of the Bulgarian presidency. I had my first working meeting with Mr. Moraes after the constituent meeting of the Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group in 2017 in October at the European Parliament in Brussels. And ever since then, we have been working together looking for a consensus for the most efficient way to organize the work of the group. That's why I'd like to thank him personally. I'd like to thank the Libe Committee and its Secretariat and Mr. Diaz de Mera and the colleagues from the DG Presidency of the European Parliament for their support. Article 88 of the TFEU from Lisbon, the Lisbon Treaty, provides for an unprecedented form of scrutiny of the activities of Europol by regulating this political scrutiny as a shared responsibility between the European Parliament and the national parliaments. During the Estonian presidency, we had the constituent meeting of the JPSG, but unfortunately we could not reach consensus and adopt the rules of procedure. That's why we left this decision for today's meeting because of the reserves of 9 national parliaments. I'd like to thank these national parliaments because as of today, after the bilateral consultations, they in principle support the compromise text. We have been working with Mr. Moraes over these months, and I'd like to appeal again to you to be constructive in the next panel so that we could take this historic decision today for effecting the necessary parliamentary control on the activities of Europol. The thematic focus of today's agenda also includes the cooperation with the Western Balkans, because we should all make joint efforts so that these countries would have a secure future and maintain their Euro-Atlantic orientation. This means a lot to us. I'm glad that the topic of the Western Balkans features as a focus in the work of Europol and its multilateral programming. I'd like to thank Europol and Rob Wainwright personally and his team for their active role in achieving these goals. Amongst the challenges that we're going to discuss, a central place is taken by cybersecurity in the era of digitalization and online services, as well as the combating of terrorism and organized crime to ensure online security and neutralize and restrict illegal content on the internet. I'd like to thank Commissioners Gabriel and King for their contribution to today's debate.
уважаеми колеги,
Esteemed colleagues, I do believe that we will manage to achieve what we have come here for. And before I give the floor to the co-chair, to the co-president, Mr. Moraes, I'd like to say a few organizational words. Because the agenda is very busy today, we do not have an official break other than the lunch. But during the debate, when you feel like having a cup of coffee or a snack, you could always go out and take a coffee in the lobby in front of the hall. I'd also like to say that when you want to take the floor, you have special cards in your folders. Could you please fill them in and hand them to the colleagues to the left of the hall so that we could give you the floor in the order of receiving your requests? And now I'd like to give the floor to the co-chair, Claude Moraes, and to thank him for our teamwork in the past few months. I'd like to also thank all delegations present here today in Sofia so that we could take these historic decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Svetan. And let me underline the thanks that you've given to the members of the national parliaments here and the members of the European Parliament for all the close cooperation which has brought us to this important second meeting of the Europol Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group. So, dear co-chair, thank you to you personally for all the hard work and, of course, for hosting us in this magnificent setting. Thank you very much. So, dear colleagues, dear guests and speakers, it is with great pleasure that we welcome you to this meeting, co-organised, of course, by the Bulgarian Parliament and the European Parliament. As I already mentioned during the dinner yesterday, we're very happy that more than 75 national parliamentarians are here today, representing 27 EU member states, as well as 9 members of the European Parliament. Today's debates will start with, first of all, an exchange of views and hopefully the adoption of the rules of procedure for our scrutiny group. Second, we will discuss past and future cooperation of Europol with the Western Balkan countries. Third, we will have an exchange of views on the 2020-2022 Europol multi-annual work programme with Rob Wainwright, the Executive Director of Europol. Next, we will also hear from Mr. Parkna, the Chairperson of the Europol Management Board. We will then see a video message by Mr. Buttarelli of the European Data Protection Organisation, and we will discuss matters regarding data protection with Mr. Wierzchowski, the EU Data Protection Assistant Supervisor. And then after our lunch, kindly again provided by our Bulgarian colleagues and hosts, we will have a family photo and we will then continue our sessions. And for the family photo, notoriously, people are often late for this photo. I have been missing from many family photos, so please organise yourselves for the family photo and please be ready for this photograph, which I think takes place just outside the hall. So following the family photo, we will continue our sessions and then we will exchange views on countering illegal content online and optimising cybersecurity with Commissioners Gabriel, King and Europol Director Mr. Wainwright. And of course, we are delighted to have our 2 commissioners here and of course, delighted again to hear from our Europol Director, Mr. Wainwright. Then finally, colleagues, we will hear about Europol's contribution to the fight against terrorism and the prevention of organised crime. And in saying this final point, could I underline at the outset that today's meeting is about ensuring that we conclude the rules for Europol and that we should do everything possible in our sessions today to get to that conclusion so that Europol, the valuable agency that we all subscribe to, can carry out its work. So I do want to emphasise this at the end of that summary of the work that we want to achieve today. So now we move on to the exchange of views and the adoption of the rules of procedure for the JPSG. And here also I would be joined by my Vice Chair, Mr. Diaz de Mera, who will also join me. He is the European parliamentarian who has been leading on this subject for the European Parliament. So let me open this point with the permission of my co-chair, and we begin with the background to this issue. So, colleagues, in the constituent JPSG meeting in Brussels, we held interesting discussions on the draft rules of procedure. It wasn't possible to conclude on that occasion, as we all know, and we've had many discussions since that meeting. Mr. Eck, the JPSG co-chair at the time, and myself promised to consult all of you as national parliamentarians and to talk about the amendments that you put forward, and we have done this. And with Mr. Svetanov, we have put forward new compromise proposals. So in the past week, Mr. Svetanov and I have had intensive bilateral contacts with those delegations that had tabled amendments before the JPSG constituent meetings, and we have spoken to those of you who have expressed doubts or questions regarding certain points. Our bilateral meetings and contacts have shown that there is a very common determination to reach agreement on the JPSG rules of procedure. These contacts helped clarify the main changes that were needed to find a common ground and a text that would reflect the needs and concerns of all JPSG delegations and members. Now, we have sent you all the new compromise proposals on the 23rd of February, with a deadline for amendments set by the 12th of March. And we received comments from 6 delegations of JPSG parliaments, as well as a letter by the Danish Parliament. So, colleagues, we are on the brink of a historic moment. It is the first time such rules have ever happened, and we are setting the rules and procedures for the first joint parliamentary scrutiny body ever established. You as national parliaments, and for my colleagues in the European Parliament, are working together to strengthen Europol and the security of our citizens. So now, before we open the debate, let me first give the floor to the 7 delegations who submitted comments to the compromise proposals. Those 7 were France, Germany, Sweden, Poland, Romania, Slovakia and Denmark. So if I could begin, please. Actually, no, before I begin, yes, sorry, let me just begin with France. First, if they could please take the floor.
Oui. Oui. C'est bon, oui. Chers collègues.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I would like to thank you for all of the organisation which has gone into this meeting. We've been discussing this issue for over 4 years now, and I'd like to pay tribute to those who did the groundwork for parliamentary supervision. I recall the early work when we started getting going on this, and I'm very pleased to see the progress which has been made. And in France, we're particularly pleased to see the initial draft for rules of procedure. Of course, there's scope for improvement, there's scope for additions. But unlike last time, I don't think we'll be leaving this meeting saying we'll put it off till next time. I don't think France is alone in facing security challenges. This is a Europe-wide issue. There's a protection challenge too. And so I think the important thing is for us to make progress together. We'll have the opportunity to discuss amendments at a later stage. And there are 2 or 3 key points that I would like to raise. I think the issue of partners and observers is an important one. Denmark raised this last time. We'd like Denmark to be involved as an observer. That's a first step, which is important. Several member states have expressed the wish to be more active in Europol, and I think we should respect that too, and receive the contributions that they may wish to make. The second point is qualified majority. We'll be discussing this later, I know. The text proposed is a good compromise in our view, and it will help us move forward. I don't want to hog the floor at this stage, so I'll move on quickly to the other point I wanted to make, which is that as members of Parliament and as representatives of different EU institutions, and for the European Parliament too, I think it's very important for us to take responsibility for our decisions and not leave it to heads of state of government or speakers of different parliaments to take decisions. I think there are decisions that it is incumbent upon us to take, especially where we see trends towards populism around Europe. I think the idea of a joint parliamentary scrutiny group is one that will allow Europol to go further, be more effective on hotspots, for instance, borders. This is something we'll come back to, and I very much hope that this will allow the JPSG to do that. So, Chair, I very much hope that we will come up with an initial document today, even if things can be added at a later juncture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And may I now give our colleagues from Germany the floor, please.
Sehr geehrte Herren Vorsitzende, liebe
Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, setting up this joint parliamentary verification body is a very important step forward, and we very much support the program for this meeting. It represents a good basis, a compromise basis for our work, and on behalf of my colleagues of the German Bundestag, I would like to thank all the participants for the very hard work that they put into this over recent weeks. In particular, I would like to thank the co-chairs for having successfully carried out this work. Ensuring effective verification by this new body requires that the body have access to sufficient information. In this respect, the German Bundestag sees a very important role for the members in being able to put questions. This is one of the key rights of any parliament. And effective monitoring requires that we be able to undertake this on a permanent basis. That's why we have proposed an amendment with a view to clarifying this issue. We believe that national parliaments should, of course, use this right in a very responsible way. And this is something which can be structured in the new text. We also welcome the new formulation as regards the presidency troika with a view to setting up a secretariat and to ensuring that various issues can be dealt in subgroups if necessary. The Bundestag would very much like to see the rules of procedure being adopted today, and we hope that all delegations will support this compromise so that we can focus on issues of substance. This would give us more time in the remaining two meetings so that until we have the revision in autumn of next year to deal with these issues. So, dear colleagues, on behalf of my colleagues in the German Bundestag, we would like to call for continuing our constructive approach to ensuring proper monitoring of Europol. Thank you.
German colleagues, and now the national parliamentarians from Sweden, please.
Thank you so much. I will be very short. You have all seen the letter from us in which we highlight our opinions on the issue of the subgroups and the meaning of the words in principle according to consensus. In the dialogue after that, we are satisfied with what we see now, and we think it's very important that we can adopt this today, and we would like to say a big thank you for all the hard work from the Swedish Riksdag to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. And now we go to the national parliamentarians from Poland, our Polish colleagues.
Monsieur, Mesdames, délégués des parlements nationaux.
Distinguished members of the national parliaments, we're very happy to have been able to take full advantage of Bulgaria's hospitality, and we believe that when it comes to ensuring the security of our citizens in all of Europe and the related activities, these are of key importance to all of us. The Polish delegation has already made a number of suggestions with a view to clarifying how we can best move forward in the decision-making process in exceptional cases. And we would like to mention in particular the very positive experience that has been achieved in terms of following up the activities of Europol. This is something which, like most delegations here, we will be supporting the final conclusion. Our delegation supports the proposal put forward by the Bureau of our Assembly. We believe that in terms of achieving European solidarity, this is of key importance, and this requires a greater level of dynamism and synergy in the activities of the various European police forces. Procedural issues can and should be assessed at the right time in 2019. But today it is important indeed to adopt a clear approach with respect to Europol. Poland is therefore very eager to work with you. A number of European countries which have particular concerns in terms of security for their countries and their citizens. We believe that in terms of evaluating the proposed solutions, this will be very important. We believe that this will be very important in terms of ensuring that Europol can make an effective contribution to ensuring the security and safety of our citizens. We believe too that it is important to ensure that Europol documents can be translated into all the languages of the European Union, and budgetary provision should be made for that under the budget of the European Union.
Thank you very much to our Polish colleagues. And now for the delegation from Romania, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Tsvetanov, Mr. Moraes, dear colleagues, we are very proud to be here. We want to thank the Bulgarian colleagues for organizing the event. We would like to thank you for the work and time in order to achieve a good and effective rules of procedure. We are very pleased to see the changes made in the rules of procedure. We achieved good steps about subgroups, addressing the right to address questions, presidential troika, and so on. So we hope that today we can have a vote. You can count on our support. There are some things, maybe the right to address question is a little bit too general, but we understand that the presidential troika will have the task to set up the details, and we are hoping that we will add that in the conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the Slovakia National Parliament delegation, please.
Merci beaucoup des paroles. Nous avons seulement un petit amendement. Nous voulons que...
We would hope that all the changes to the rules should be done by consensus, in our view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, finally, from those countries who submitted comments to the compromise proposal, we have Denmark.
Dear colleagues, as chairman of the European Affairs Committee of the Danish Parliament, let me begin by thanking the co-chairs for the work you have done, trying to provide compromises on many different amendments. As you know, the Danish Parliament has submitted a number of amendments to the draft rules of procedures, where the most important point for us is that Denmark should be a full member of the Europol JPSG. As a joint parliamentarian scrutiny group to the Europol, the role of the national parliaments, in our view, is very important. As a member state of the European Union, we find clear support of the Danish view in the treaties and in the precedent from other interparliamentarian meetings. In all other interparliamentarian meetings between parliaments in the EU, there is a clear rule of including all parliaments despite national derogation from the legal framework. We are aware that there are divergent views on this, and for that very reason, it will be difficult to find a satisfactory solution today. We do not want this particular issue to stand in the way of the adoption of the rules of procedure. That is why we would accept the suggestion from the co-chairs to postpone the final decision on the Danish question and instead establish a working group who will clarify the Danish Parliament status within the Europol JPSG. The working group will consist of the presidential troika and representatives of the Danish Parliament that will finalize its work at the latest by October 2019. Thank you.
Thank you to our Danish colleagues. And of course, thank you to all the other colleagues from all the other national parliaments who had discussions with us since the last meeting also. What I'm going to do now, colleagues, is I'm going to, with the permission of Mr. Svitanov and Mr. Diaz de Mera, is provide just a short summary of a response to those points and to where we are on the question of the compromise. And following this, I will ask Mr. Diaz de Mera just to provide some additional comments. He is the Europol rapporteur, for those of you who are not aware of this, and is our expert on these matters. So I'll ask him to listen to my summary, and if he wishes to add any points, then I'd be very happy for him to do so. So let me just summarise where we are, colleagues. First of all, to thank you for your interventions and to say that in response, we have some key elements of the proposal which I think, having listened to you, we can accommodate all the concerns which have been expressed. In front of you, you have an updated version of the compromise. This version includes the comments made by the French and German delegations on the issue of written questions and the observations that can be included in the conclusions. The new text also reflects a strong role for national parliaments through the presidential troika in the agenda setting, the preparation of discussion documents, the secretariat, and the drafting of the conclusions of the JPSG. It also gives delegations the possibility to effectively contribute to the agenda and the scrutiny findings. It guarantees and promotes the democratic right of parliamentarians and the fundamental principle of scrutiny, namely the right to ask questions during and in between JPSG meetings that, of course, need to be answered within a reasonable deadline by Europol. Specifically to our Romanian colleagues, we would like to repeat our commitment that guidelines on the written and oral questions procedure need to be set up. The presidential troika will need to take up this point as soon as possible. But the proposed system also warrants quality control and a workable scenario for Europol and its services. So these rules of procedure leave room for the JPSG's role to evolve and develop further. They foresee the possibility to set up subgroups and ensure the participation of all chambers and parliaments, national parliaments, in the scrutiny activity. To the Swedish delegation, we would like to reiterate that a discussion on the focus of such subgroups should be held. The presidential troika, giving political guidance to the JPSG, should take the initiative in this case. To our esteemed Polish colleagues, we understand your request and the importance of having a more open linguistic regime by Europol on providing documents such as the multi-annual policy programme. Mr. Svitanov and I will include a reference to the point in the conclusion, and we understand that decision-making process is also part of the general review which will take place following up to 2019, October of 2019. And we thank our Polish colleagues for the further discussions we have had on this. Our proposal also deals with the issue of observers and the level of their involvement in the daily work of the JPSG. And then coming finally to the question, which we shall now call the Danish question. Regarding the Danish level of participation, I thank the colleagues for their presentation just now. Mr. Svetanov, Mr. Christensen of the Danish delegation, and I are happy to inform you that an agreement was reached that satisfies both parties. A paragraph will be included, a written paragraph will be included to our conclusions that a working group composed by the Presidential Troika and the Danish Parliament will be set up to deliver recommendations ahead of the revision scheduled in October 2019. Mr. Svetanov and I are convinced that the proposed text is balanced and will ensure an active involvement of those member states that are no longer part of the Europol regulation, mirroring their level of participation in Europol. And I think this is important to all of us. All in all, this new compromise proposal also incorporates the main changes already agreed upon in our debates of the 9th and 10th of October 2017 as regards speaking time, the possibility to hold extraordinary meetings, the reporting by the JPSG representatives, attending Europol Management Board meetings, the guaranteeing of the possibility of interpretation at meetings held in the presidency member states, and so on. We would also like to recall delegations that are, or recall two delegations that a review of the rules of procedure by October 2019 is foreseen while respecting the principles set by the Speakers' Conference on decision making. In order to ensure an efficient and effective scrutiny, delegations will, however, have the opportunity to present amendments and annotations to draft conclusions. We sincerely hope that you will support the progress that has been made, as most concerns, we believe, have been incorporated into this new text, resulting in a balanced proposal. Before I ask if any other delegations would like to take the floor, or whether Mr. Svetanov would like to add anything, I would like to ask Mr. Diaz de Mera whether he would like to make any additions to this general summary. No. It's okay. I think Mr. Diaz de Mera is indicating I've spoken long enough. That's long enough for the European Parliament. So, Mr. Svetanov, would you like to add anything? Okay, I think I've exhausted everyone. But I hope colleagues will bear with me, because it's important to summarise all of the hard work that has taken place since the first meeting. Okay, where are we now? So now, oh yeah, now we've got to adopt it. So, okay, would any other delegation wish to take the floor? And my notes say that time is short. Would anyone else like to take the floor before I move on to the adoption? No? Okay. Who do we have? Cyprus, please.
Good morning. We wish to express our satisfaction with this draft version of the rules of it incorporates the major concerns that were expressed in our first constituent meeting. We believe that this set of rules provides a solid framework within which the JPSG will be fully equipped to effectively exercise its mandate regarding the political monitoring of Europol, as provided for in the regulation and the treaty. We would like to thank the co-chairs for the drafting of this balanced compromise text that we very much hope can be adopted today. Regarding proposed amendments, we believe that the amendment proposed by the German Bundesrat regarding the right to ask questions is a valid one, and we support it. The amendment proposed by our French colleagues is also supported, since we consider it will facilitate reaching consensus for the adoption of conclusions. The amendments proposed by the Polish Senate regarding the introduction of an additional qualified majority procedure will complicate decision-making. We believe that constructive abstention would be the way to go. Our general view is that this issue should be referred back to the Speakers' Conference for clarification. Regarding the issue of language version of documents submitted of the JPSG by Europol, we believe that maintaining the practice of having English and French as working languages is practicable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I expected somebody to come in at the end there. Belgian colleague, please.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Please allow us to congratulate you as well on this very balanced text, balanced rules of procedure. I do believe that this is a very good and clear compromise, especially also with our Danish friends. I think that was one of the main issues. Just one minor remark. I've said this in the past as well. There is one typo still in the text, 4.1.e and 4.3. We say GSPG instead of GPSG. That was the only remark I've stated in the past. Okay, but thanks again, and also we can agree upon this very balanced text, and we hope that our fellow colleagues will do as well. Thank you.
Outstanding contribution by Belgium, thank you. So I say to our Cypriot colleagues and, of course, our Belgian colleagues, we've taken note of both. Our Secretariat has taken note of both contributions, and we will progress both within the procedures that we have, including within the review and the Speakers' Conference. So thank you for this, and we have noted both points. And we will progress those. So if there are no other contributions at this point, I think I can now, with Mr. Svitanov, jointly, we can now proceed to the adoption of the rules of procedure by consensus. Are they so adopted? I'm just amazed we've got to this point. Sorry. Is it okay? So they are so adopted. I don't have a hammer or anything. Okay, good. Thank you very much, colleagues. Mrs. Svitanov, do you want to?
Dear colleagues, I would like to thank you all for what we have done today, because this is a decision of historic importance. And I'm very satisfied with my joint work with Claude Morales, because as co-chairs, we have been able, after discussions with all national parliaments, to come up with this agreement today. This is a sign that we are starting our essential work related to the scrutiny of Europol. And it is my belief that Europol will agree to these rules of procedure, and we will all guarantee the transparency for which each European citizen and institution dream. Thank you.
So we now go to... I think it's you again. Okay.
Dear colleagues, we continue now with the next item on the agenda, the past and future cooperation with the Western Balkan countries. Sorry, the microphone went off. The Western Balkans are an area of strategic importance to the European Union. They are not simply neighbors of Europe. They are in the heart of Europe. With a view to the security of the whole continent, it is of vital importance not to leave blank spots on Europe's map, which may create conditions of vacuum and creation of new interference zones and by other factors on the geopolitical map of Europe. At the same time, the situation in the Western Balkans has also a number of pragmatic dimensions related to security, such as fighting the smuggling of goods and drugs, fighting human trafficking, prevention of radicalization, and work to identify the neutralization of the foreign fighters who are coming back after having fought on the side of Daesh. We know that there are many, many of them who come to the Western Balkans. Now the time has come for them to find a way to get back to their native country, and therefore we need to exercise control. Control over the borders is one of the important areas where the Western Balkan countries can contribute a lot. In this context, we need to have a clear view of the situation with the cooperation of Europol with these countries. In other words, what works and what brings results, which are the challenges, and what are the ways for the future. Therefore, it is my pleasure to give the floor to the Deputy Executive Director of Europol, Mr. Aldrich Martinu, to present to us the situation as seen by Europol. And then I will give the floor to Mr. Vladimir Redic, the General Police Director in Serbia, to give us examples of their cooperation with Europol. Mr. Martinu, you have the floor, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Tsvetanov, dear Mr. Moraes, honorable members of European Parliament, members of national parliaments, Madam, Sirs. First of all, I would like to thank for having been invited to your session and to contribute to this important topic on Western Balkan. As it has been just underlined by Mr. Tsvetanov, Western Balkan region remains a key strategic area for EU, key strategic area also for Europol, in particular for security-related issues, as it has been several times reflected, and in particular recently in February in EU Commission communication on Western Balkan initiative, which sets up an overall strategy for Western Balkan. And what is important, it also includes a flagship initiative on internal security and migration, when the role of GHA agencies and in particular of Europol in the Western Balkan region is expected to be further enhanced. Also, Bulgarian presidency putting very strong emphasis, in particular in terms of capacity building within and with the region, based on concrete initiatives with the aim towards some tangible results in the area of security. Now, let me present some brief overview on the crime situation in the Western Balkan region, which is based on our strategic threat assessment and also on analytical products. The region remains both a transit and a destination area for several types of illicit goods. It is also the area of origin for some property and violent crimes, the production of illicit drugs and goods that are smuggled to the Balkan countries and then further on trafficked to the territory of European Union. Migrant smuggling is predicted to remain also a key problem for the region. Balkan Road, despite the decreased number of transit detected, is still one of the key routes for secondary movements into EU. The number of detected cases of human trafficking, as well as the number of identified and potential victims in the Western Balkan countries, indicates that the issue of human trafficking is on the decline, and there are no indications of an increase. Organized property crime remains an issue for the Western Balkan. The crime rate in the region remains high, and so is the number of Balkan groups which are involved in property crime on the territory of European Union. The smuggling of excise goods, mainly cigarettes, is another feature in the Western Balkan. Goods is smuggled within the border of the Balkan countries as well as further on to the territory of EU. Criminal groups originating from Western Balkan region are heavily involved in the trafficking of firearms to the EU. These groups typically have strong links to diaspora communities based in the destination countries on the territory of EU. Production and smuggling of drugs in the Western Balkan, especially cannabis and synthetic drugs, represents the most dominant and the most profitable type of organized crime in which the largest number of organized crime groups are involved. Cybercrime is also on the rise. There are different types of crime are registered, such as denials of service attacks, mostly directed against the website of private companies for the purpose of extortion. As far as terrorism is concerned, the key locations in some Western Balkan countries had been a reliable source of radicalization and recruitment, but to a lesser extent of departures of the recruited foreign fighters to Syria compared to the previous period of time. By now, around 800 persons have traveled to the conflict zones in Syria and Iraq from the Western Balkan region to join Islamic State. And the Islamic movements are closely interconnected across the region and linked to the EU member states with their Western Balkan diaspora. When it comes to the cooperation between Europol and Western Balkan, we played and we continue to play a relevant role in the region by supporting operations to tackle main criminal activities such as drugs trafficking, weapons and migrant smuggling, as well as counterterrorism. This is facilitated by the fact that all Western Balkan partners has concluded and ratified operational agreements with Europol, and they have posted or are just about to post their liaison officers to the headquarters to The Hague. These officers, just being in our headquarters, can take part in operational meetings, they can coordinate activities, provide advice, and in particular maintain the regular contact with our experts, analysts, and other liaison officers from member states. Just to illustrate the added value of the contribution which was provided by Western Balkan, I have two examples of operations showing the joint cooperation between EU member states and Western Balkan law enforcement partners. November 2017, joint operation, Joint Action Day Calibre, which was led by United Kingdom with support of Europol and Frontex. Operation designed against firearms trafficking and migrant smugglings. So physical checks carried out at the border crossings, mainly in the Western Balkan region, and it resulted in seizure of 136 firearms, 18 individuals arrested, and 150 individuals were prevented from illegally entering territory of EU. Along 14 EU member states, Switzerland, Europol, Frontex, EU and ODC, and partners from Western Balkan, Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, Fyrom, Serbia, also Kosovo participated. Second example, Operation Penta Benji, February this year, involving partners from Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Slovenia and Croatia as member states, and it was focused on organized crime activities of facilitation of migrant smuggling from territory of Western Balkan to Western Europe. Also, EULEX, Kosovo and Europol Migrant Smuggling Center participated, which led to the arrest of 16 individuals. What is also positive when we see increasing number of operational meetings organized at Europol when partners from law enforcement agencies Western Balkan participated. Moreover, cooperation with Western Balkan is also high on the agenda of the current EU policy cycle and its implementation. For 2018, all the countries of the region have been identified as partners to cooperate with for at least 19 operational actions in area of cannabis, cocaine, heroin, firearms, illegal migration and organized property crime. What is also positive, all Western Balkan countries contributed to serious organized crime threat assessment, our strategic flagship. I would also like to highlight some regional activities in the field of police cooperation which have been sponsored by EU member states and which Europol is supporting in line with the priorities of EU policy cycle. Firstly, integrative internal security governance concept, which is coordination platform for Western Balkan launched in Brdo. Aim is to promote internal security governance, capacity building and reform at regional level. It can be seen as some kind of Western Balkan EU policy cycle which can be harmonized with the activities we carry out at EU level. Secondly, joint operational office in Vienna, official launch in 2016 under umbrella Impact Facilitated Illegal Migration. It is focusing on Western Balkan in terms of response to any urgent emergency cases in the region which might occur. And third example, Western Balkans instrument of pre-accession IPA 2017, which is driven or coordinated by Italy and focusing on activities in the region in the field of cross-border cooperation among law enforcement of EU member states and third partners. Despite the, I would say, promising picture I just described, there is nevertheless a need for further strengthening of cooperation. So that's why we permanently encourage all involved countries, both EU members and the Western Balkan partners, to share with us as much information as they can, in particular in the more critical areas such as drug production and trafficking, firearms, illegal migration and property crime, as well as on foreign terrorist fighters which originate from territory of Western Balkan. So all necessary instruments are at disposal. We have operational agreements, partners are technically connected in a secure manner via Siena, they have liaison officers, so we only have to ensure that we will make use of these tools to the maximum extent. Last but not least, I would like to update you about another pilot project on deployment of Europol liaison officers to Western Balkan. In the first pilot stage, we are going to deploy our liaison officers to Serbia, Montenegro and Albania with expected deployment in summer. And we expect that it should lead to increased and more proactive operational cooperation, especially with law enforcement. Just to conclude, a lot has been done. There is positive development. We have still some security concerns, but those countries actively participated in finding solutions together with us, and there is a lot of work to be done. So Europol remains at disposal of EU member states and Western Balkan partners just to assist you and support your joint operation, just to improve security and safety on both territories, EU and also Western Balkan. Thank you.
Благодаря, господин Мартин.
Thank you, Mr. Martinu. In my view, what we've heard as an overall review and assessment shows that there are many positive developments. Of course, there is still room for building upon this capacity and potential, and definitely to support more strongly the Western Balkans and to encourage them. And now I will give the floor to Mr. Vladimir Redic, the General Police Director of the Republic of Serbia. He will share with us the experience and their method of working jointly with Europol. He will quote also some best practices.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to address you on behalf of the Ministry of Interior of the Republic of Serbia and my personal behalf. It is a very important meeting to both the Ministry of Interior for the security issues to be discussed here in the, and the Republic of Serbia itself, given the European perspective of the Western Balkans. Today's security situation in Europe is very complex, and among other things, it is a consequence of numerous threats and challenges, the most frequent of which are illegal migration, besides terrorism and organized crime. These security threats and challenges went beyond state borders a long time ago. They jeopardize all values of the modern democratic society and represent a serious threat to the security of all citizens. That is why our response has to be tough at both national and regional and European level through mutual assistance and cooperation above all. The Republic of Serbia is actively involved in the cooperations and joint activities with other countries, especially the Western Balkan countries, which is a region of great significance to Europol, with a view to building up regional and European security. The Republic of Serbia has been efficiently implementing the operational agreement with Europol since 2014. Since June 2014, when Serbia became a Europol operational partner, until today, over the 21,500 messages have been exchanged with Europol and police agency at EU and non-EU countries through Siena. Each of these messages exchange contains considerable amount of operational information important for further cross-analysis against database in Europol and EU countries. Given that the number of messages exchanged through Siena is constantly and greatly growing according to Europol statistics, especially in the areas of terrorism and fight against the illegal migration, drug and arms trafficking, and that all countries in Europe and beyond have been increasingly switching to cooperation through Europol channel, it is necessary to proceed with efficient cooperation with Europol and to strengthen capacity for the successful cooperation. In addition, as the third part, we have encouraged the importance of the involvement in the implementation of the EU policy cycle 2014-2017. Therefore, over the last 3 years, we have actively participated under the auspices of Europol, together with countries of the region and EU members countries, in more than 17 joint international police operations against all types of crimes, especially the combat against the smuggling of migrations, arms, smuggling of cybercrime impact. Serbia shall continue to follow the priority of the EU policy cycle 2018-2021 set by the EU SOCTA 2017 and shall bring itself in accord with the operational plans formulated by EU member states by actively participating under the umbrella of Europol in joint police operational amid dismantling organized crime group. The national SOCTA document was drawn and adopted for the first time at the late 2015 within the Serbian Inter-Ministry with the application of Europol methodology for devising a strategic documents. This was a major task for the minister and at the same time the fulfillment of one of the obligations for joining the European Union, which defined in the recommendation of the European Commission in the Action Plan for Chapter 24. Subsequently, in 2016, the regional series of organized crime threat assessment was made in joint response of Serbia, Montenegro, and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia in the fight against most serious type of crimes, which send a clear message that we wish to have a safe region and security for all citizens. This is the beginning of a new approach which are leading us toward more efficient actions in the field in accordance with the international standards and best practice in developed countries Europe. In addition, cooperation between police services with Europol is of extreme importance and has been increasingly intensive. One of the best examples that I would like to emphasize in cooperation with Europol analytic projects. Serbia is full member with 13 Europol analytics projects, in all 4 in the field of drugs, 2 in the field of terrorism, and also in the field of human trafficking, smuggling of migrants, child pornography, cybercrime, counterfeiting of money, illegal production and smuggling of cigarettes, and arms smuggling. Let me emphasize significant support Europol offers to regional initiative in the Western Balkan with the view of developing operational support with the Western Balkan countries. The efforts invested in strengthening cooperation in Western Balkan countries, especially in the field of the countering terrorism, continue. Serbia will continue to provide regular the information importance of Europol and all its partners, while that needs to be strengthened, and the very request from the Serbian police in Europol in order to gain insight into the need for possible launch of parallel and other joint investigations. The proactive role of Europol so far is the implementation of the activity of the Western Balkan Counter-Terrorism Initiative, with which a lot of significant information has been exchanged and important experience shared since foundation at 2011 to date should also be viewed in that context. The Republic of Serbia is only Western Balkan country which has shared its national FTF foreign terrorist fighters list via the special Siena channel to all these counter-terrorism partners without an exception. The Republic of Serbia has also provided the national FTF list for insertion into the Europol information system and also agrees that this list should be provided for Schengen system, thus contributing with its national data to the security of the European Union in fight against terrorism. Over the past 3 years, we have witnessed that mass movement of refugees from the countries devastated by war, as well as economic immigrations along the Western Balkan route. This posed a potential threat and could have been taken advantage of by terrorism who wish to reach countries they find interesting for the execution of attacks. Luckily, thanks to good cooperation of the Western Balkan country, this huge flow of immigrants has been stopped. However, despite the fact that there is control over immigrants entering the territory of Republic of Serbia, we still have to be additional cautious and with the support of Europol improve the very successful cooperation to date and exchanging the information among Western Balkan countries. I believe that we will agree that the organized crime, terrorism, immigration, and issues accompanying immigrations, such as smuggling of people, present a global problem. But I think that with the support of Europol, stronger cooperation, above all, and timely exchanging of intelligence in the region are crucial for responding to all the challenges we are faced with, particularly for the implementing of coordinating activity with the view of suppressing potential threats. The Ministry of Interior of the Republic of Serbia is, as before, ready to fully contribute to that aim. Let me express my gratitude for exceptional support Europol has given to the Serbia police and underline the strong commitment of the Ministry of Interior of the Republic of Serbia to engage in all regional and European security processes, as well as give to its full contribution with its possibility to stability and security through intensive cooperation with all partners. Thank you.
Благодаря, господин Ребич.
Thank you, Mr. Redic. I think what you've said and the emphasis that you have made on the increase of information exchange with Europol. You mentioned over 21,000 messages passed through Siena. It is very important, and all of us have to thank the current director of Europol, Mr. Rob Wainwright, especially who created a favorable environment for the exchange of information. And Bulgaria is one of the recent members of the European Union, and I know and I remember all the meetings that we've had where Mr. Wainwright insisted again and again that we need to increase the exchange of information, because information is the best basis for analysis, guaranteeing the efficiency of the operations. I would like to thank Mr. Redic, who shared good practices, successful operations. And now we will open the floor for debate to everyone who is willing to participate in it. We have Mr. Kitiros who wants to take the floor first. I give you the floor, and we continue with our agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Martinu, and Mr. Rebic. We are aware how spreading Islamization in the Western Balkans has also resulted in providing fighters for the Islamic State or other Islamic extremist organizations. Do you reckon that such a structured and targeted approach is funded and directed by state structures or only by terrorist organizations and religious cycles? Thank you.
Благодаря и аз.
Thank you. And now we will hear Mrs. Karamanli, the French National Assembly. You have the floor.
Merci pour...
Thank you very much for sharing that very important work in the Balkans on cooperation with us. I just want to pick up on weapons trafficking, arms trafficking. The European Directive on arms has not included arms trafficking, which we regret in France. Given the gravity of the situation, we would like to see some initiatives in this area over the next few months. The Assemblée nationale in France has addressed this issue on several occasions and referred to the importance of traceability of weapons and the importance of marking and having national registers. There's a problem with having an inventory of weapons that have been taken out of the circuit, and we've seen in terrorist attacks that what has happened is weapons have found their way back into service that had previously been taken out. So what could Europol do? What possible measures could there be to get a discussion on arms trafficking going again so that we could be informed of any discussions following the elections? Thank you.
Господин Маритино.
Mr. Maritino.
Thank you for your question. Actually, if I recall correctly, a year ago I was invited to European Parliament, I think to Libe. There was some dedicated discussion when the directive on weapons was just put forward, so we provided some justification and proposals, but of course we remain ready to share the information about the trends, about what's going on in the area of firearms trafficking, to be at your disposal when you put forward the actually legislative proposals. And of course, as a police officers, we just support any kind of registration, marking, making weapons traceable. And also we face problem with changing of blind firing weapons, which are converted to the fully functional weapons. Yeah, so actually this topic should be covered as well. So we remain at your disposal and we can share everything what we have just to support your activities in legislative process.
Благодаря, господин Мартин.
Thank you, Mr. Martinu. Our guests from the Western Balkans would also like to take the floor. Mr. Balu from the Parliament of Albania. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'll firstly like to thank you, the European Union and Europol, for all the help that has been given to my country from you in fighting organized crime. In the past few years, we have been having major problems with security when it comes to drug trafficking, and we highly appreciate all the involvement of Europol in this war. As you know better than I, drug money are one of the major sources for terrorist organizations. Therefore, I believe that it is of crucial importance to have a more frontal approach towards drug traffickers in Western Balkan. Thank you.
Благодаря и аз.
Thank you. Esteemed colleagues, no one else requested the floor so far. Allow me to invite the national delegations, nevertheless, to take the floor if they're interested. Otherwise, Mr. Obweiler, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mrs. Fidanov. Just a very short remark from my side to complement the words of my Deputy Executive Director. Good morning, everyone, by the way. Mr. Fidanov also referred to why Europol puts a lot of emphasis on the need for always improving information exchange. He's right, it is the basis of all of the work that we do. And now turning to the region of the Western Balkans, there has been significant improvements in the cooperation between Europol and each of the constituent law enforcement authorities in this region. But I have to say the picture is still a mixed picture, that we have very good information exchange with some countries, but not good with others. So a general message from Europol is that our work is still not done in terms of fully integrating our friends and colleagues in that region to the community of law enforcement cooperation in Europe. And so from a point of view of parliamentary scrutiny, I think it's good that we understand that we have to continue with our efforts on a constant basis to encourage the best possible cooperation because it is critical for our work. And at the moment, there are still gaps in the way that we are sharing this information. Thank you.
Благодаря, господин Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. There is a request for the floor by Mrs. Bojana Potokan from Slovenia. You have the floor.
Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. National Council from Slovenia. According to the Global Peace Index of 2017, Slovenia ranks at number 7 and therefore finds itself among the safest countries of the world. But because of the geographical position, history, language, cultural and economic relations, we too are affected by the criminal events happening along the so-called Balkan route, where Slovenia mainly acts as a transit country and enters into EU. The area of Western Balkans represents the focal point for logistical planning of drug and weapon trafficking, illegal migrations, and the consequence gives to opportunity to form new markets for organized criminal groups. We are aware of the fact that no one has the ability to solve the problems alone, and therefore we firmly believe that a further close cooperation among member states, Europol, Interpol, countries of the Western Balkans and the counter-terrorist group, and efforts made as part of Western Balkan counter-terrorism initiative are the key of countering crime in the area in the long run. And of course, many compliments for nice organization. Thank you.
Благодаря и аз.
Thank you. There are no further requests for the floor. And we could indeed congratulate our colleagues from Europol for what they have done and for the way they wanted to build on the capacity together with the Western Balkans. I'd like to also congratulate the colleagues from the Western Balkans, and I'd also like to congratulate Mr. Redic for presenting the best practices and what has been done. But I'm convinced that with the standard introduced by Mr. Wainwright, who is leaving us in May, we will continue to work in the same vein. I'd like to give the credit of trust to Ms. Catherine de Boll from Belgium, who will be the new Europol director. I'm convinced that all the decisions we'll take today will continue to implement together with the necessary support of the national parliaments and the European Parliament. And now I'd like to give the floor to my co-chair, Mr. Claude Moraes, to introduce the next point on the agenda, the exchange of views on the project for the multi-annual Europol programming.
Thank you very much, Svetan. And as you can see, colleagues, we are going through the agenda.
Извинявам се много, но постъпи...
I'm sorry, the Spanish delegation still requests the floor. Unfortunately, the request did not come at the time when we were still offering delegations the floor, but Spain still has the floor. You have it.
Microphone for the speaker, please.
Моля ви, само микрофона включете.
Microphone, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of the representatives here at this very important scrutiny group for Europol. The first thing I'd like to do here is to actually say on behalf of the Spanish delegation that we believe that the Europol model is a success story and a success which is working very, very well. And we believe that it is totally correct that we establish this type of cooperation with countries which are not members of the European Union directly. And in particular, I think it's important that where we have an issue where we involve other countries, if there's a route where through other countries where there is organized crime, if it's a route through which terrorists can come into the European Union, it's important that we cooperate with those countries. I believe that this type of cooperation should be it should be stepped up. It should be a very intense cooperation with these with these countries, and I think it should actually include the exchange of information which could enable us to prevent these types of crimes from occurring, because we know that this gives rise to great concern in our countries, be it the trafficking of firearms, be it the illicit illegal immigrants, be it also drug trafficking and other crimes. These are things that affect the young people of our countries very severely, and I think we need to step up our cooperation with these countries. We've got to ensure that the police forces in our member states cooperate well amongst each other. We know that Europe is a space or an area of security and it's a safe space, but we do have a number of challenges that are of concern to many of us. The first of this is terrorism, of course. We've got to try and combat terrorism throughout the European Union, and this is something that our citizens are asking of us. So we've got to try and ensure that we work as closely as possible, all countries of the European Union and those who cooperate with us within Europol. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I truly give the floor to Mr. Morales.
Thank you very much, Svetan, and thank you, colleagues, for the discussion on the Western Balkans. It's a crucial issue for Europol. Now we move to the question of the Europol multi-annual work programme. Again, I'm delighted that we can now move to the actual work of Europol, having finalised the rules, and I'm delighted that we can go to the substance. And for this, we have a presentation by Rob Wainwright. Mr. Svetanov, of course, thanked Rob on behalf of the national parliaments. You can thank people too much, I reckon, but I do need to put on record the thanks of the European Parliament. Rob has been the head of Europol for 9 years. He took office in 2009. His mandate will end in April 2018, and I think all of us would agree that he has provided outstanding leadership to this agency, creating something which we can all be proud. And I would also like to warmly welcome, on behalf of the European Parliament and the Libe Committee, Catherine de Boll from Belgium. I know she will be an outstanding director of Europol. She has already appeared before our committee, and a warm welcome to Catherine. And now we go, as I said, to the substance of what Europol does, and we very much look forward to the presentation by the Executive Director of Europol, Mr. Rob Wainwright. Rob.
Thank you very much, Claude, also for those kind remarks, and the same, of course, towards Svetan. So it's the pleasure for me now to introduce Europol's multi-annual programming document for the period 2019 to 21, and it's comprised of three main elements: the strategic objectives based on our 5-year program, what our resource programming is, and our external strategy also. Okay. Well, 1 second, excuse me. Oh, you have a better touch than me. Thank you. So firstly, Europol's strategy is framed over, currently at least, over the 5-year period culminating in 2020. And we aim to be flexible within that, because in the end, Europol's role is to provide dynamic, flexible operational support to the member states. But nonetheless, we do work, of course, to main strategic goals around fundamental concepts of increasing information exchange and providing operational support, especially in those priority areas of serious organized crime, cybercrime, and terrorism. Is it this one? To achieve this, Europol are continuously developing, especially its core IT solutions. And you can see here some evidence of how this is leading to significant increases in the use of our core systems such as Siena and the Europol Information System. In fact, last year, for the first time, we passed more than 1 million exchanges, intelligence reports that were exchanged on Siena. And at the same time, the Europol Information System also contained more than 1 million data entries. So this is now quite a big industrialized operation of information sharing across a community of over 1,000 law enforcement agencies that are now cooperating on the Europol channel. The Europol platform for experts as well as hosting now 50 platforms in which 13,000 users are sharing their police expertise and knowledge amongst each other. We have a 24/7 operational center to ensure that we can provide the quickest possible support. And you can see also that we are very active in the field with our so-called mobile office deployments as well. Looking ahead to 2019 and beyond, Europol will further... This clicker is... Excuse me. Europol will further invest in technology and business innovation, especially to try and increase the means by which we can deal with this significant expansion in our information sharing. To do that, to give you some perspective, over 9 years, the amount of information sharing that Europol is now dealing with every day is 9 times the amount it was 9 years ago. So a 9-fold increase. This is an enormous increase. And yet the budgetary increase, the resource increase for Europol over that period is 2 times. So to cope with 9 times growth in our core work with just a 2 times resource capability means we have to continuously invest in innovation and technology with very smart, modern data science solutions especially. This is fundamental to the work of Europol and to securing our future success. Of course, whilst at the same time developing our operational cooperation as well. Now, as for our core work, of course, we provide this operational information exchange in the end to identify opportunities to support the Member States' authorities to take practical police-led operations on the ground to actually prevent crime or disrupt criminal organizations. That's the whole point of our information sharing. And you can see the operational outputs currently that are pursued through Europol. So in last year, we supported around 1,500 high-level operations, producing more than 19,000 operational reports, 113 action days. These are very large-scale, multidimensional operations across a very large number of countries, focused on the key elements of organized crime and terrorism, for example. So again, these are significant increases on the previous years as well. We have high satisfaction rates currently. We have high satisfaction rates currently from the surveys that we are running with our operational partners, and also getting good feedback for our ability to deploy what we call Europol mobile support and mobile analysis teams, especially to the locations on the external border of the European Union. At the European Cybercrime Centre, perhaps we have the most innovative development of our capability, where we are developing very cutting-edge solutions on decryption and on providing digital forensic analysis support to our member states as well. Also, in regard to removing terrorist content online, last year the European Internet Referral Unit of Europol assessed almost 26,000 contents and is now working with over 80 social media platforms for referring this work. Looking ahead in the area of serious and organized crime, the priorities of the EU policy cycle are, of course, very important for us, and we work within this framework, and this provides the main area for the focus of our operational work. We will continue to focus on the tasks in the so-called operational action plans, and also developing new priority areas in a more substantial way, for example, on criminal finances, money laundering, and environmental crime. In addition, we're trying to inject more energy and life into the drug strategy of cooperation across Europe. This remains, in volume terms, still the biggest crime sector in Europe, still affecting many thousands of our citizens every day, as you know, and has been a very difficult part of fighting crime for decades. We must not become complacent, and we must continue to look for new ways to deal with this. We're working towards the Malta implementation plan on migration, especially in combating people smuggling groups. And also, of course, providing at the same time flexible operational support to other areas. So we follow our main priorities, but where there are very high profile requests to support investigations, then of course we will respond urgently. This we have done in recent months in Malta and now in Slovakia to respond to the request to support very important investigations into the tragic cases in each of those countries regarding the murder of journalists. In the area of cybercrime, our Cybercrime Centre is expanding its focus also on monitoring criminality on the dark web, but also many other areas, such as the way in which cryptocurrencies at the moment, for example, are exploited by criminals. On terrorism, trying to achieve greater information exchange, this we have also succeeded in many ways, whilst continuing to improve our monitoring of terrorist content online. Looking ahead, the new access we will have to travel data, I think it will be a very rich new source of information for Europol. And we've started working with member states on the future development of their passenger information units, for example. We remain committed, of course, as you might expect, to being an accountable and efficient organisation. We recognise that with the increased work of Europol, the increased impact it has on the internal security of our citizens, and the increased profile, that what comes with that is extra responsibility for the organisation to remain transparent and accountable in its work. I'm pleased to say that we've had good audit reports in recent years regarding the implementation of our budgets and the implementation of our work programme. Of course, over the last 1 year, the very important work involved in implementing the new Europol regulation as well, establishing new cooperation mechanisms, for example, with the European Data Protection Supervisor, which is our new supervisory authority, and I'm very pleased that we have the Deputy Director here today and the Deputy Supervisor here today. I've established a very good working relationship with Mr. Butarelli and his senior staff, and I'm very happy at the way in which Europol and EDPS have so far established their cooperation in this important area. Of course, parliamentary scrutiny also is highly important for us. Through the recognition and the support and the advice of national and European parliaments, Europol can project its image in a better, more transparent way. So I believe our ways of being accountable to parliaments is an absolutely essential part of the work of Europol. And for that reason, I'm delighted that today this committee has established the rules of procedure for the JPSG, and I congratulate Mr. Moraes, Mr. Svetanov, Mr. Diaz de Mera, and all of you for achieving this important milestone. Meanwhile, Europol's governance and support and administration functions have, of course, increased in order to support the operational work that we have had. It's put an awful lot of stress on our budget. In this area, of course, you'd expect me always to, as an agency director, to make the case for increasing the budget. But as I said earlier, when we increase so much in our core work and have only a relatively modest increase in our budget, then of course it produces new demands on the organization. Europol takes its responsibility to continue to be ever more efficient, of course, so we don't automatically expect budget increases just because our work is becoming more challenging. But there are some areas where we're feeling real stress to respond to the new priorities that have been given to Europol. And one of those is certainly in the area of our IT information technology capability. I mention this because I think it's perhaps the greatest risk that Europol has to its effectiveness in the next few years. Although we have had important increases to our budgets and resources in recent years, supported by not least the Libby Committee in the European Parliament and Council, these have always been increases that have gone directly to our operational areas, such as on terrorism. Of course, this is understandable. But every time we do this, we have failed at the same time to adjust the capabilities, for example, of our IT department. So this means that there is an unbalanced injection of resources into Europol. And this would be difficult to adjust for any agency. But at Europol, I think we all have to recognize that the IT support of Europol is not like any other agency. It's not providing just computers and a network for exchanging data. It's not a support department. It is a frontline area of Europol's work. We are nothing apart from our ability to collect and exchange and analyze data. So the colleagues we have working in our ID department are some of the, for example, best data scientists that you see in Europe. But so their ability, therefore, to provide that operational support is affected when we cannot adjust the IT resources of this area. So my appeal to all of our colleagues in the different parliaments is to recognize, please, that in the future we need to refresh the way in which Europol can maintain its core business of sharing information. And finally, of course, in terms of our external strategy between 2017 and 20, you see the list of our priority countries here. Of course, it includes the United States of America, where we have over 12 federal agencies now integrated into the liaison officer community of Europol. It includes, as we've just been discussing, of course, the area of the Western Balkans, but also the MENA countries. And I recently enjoyed a very successful, interesting visit to Algeria to try and develop our cooperation there. The chairman of the Europol Management Board, Mr. Parkner, will follow me shortly to tell you more about the external strategy in more detail. My very last point is to echo the words of Claude Moraes in welcoming the appointment of my successor, Mrs. Catherine de Bolle. She will make an excellent executive director of Europol. I'm very pleased with the choice that the institutions have taken. And already she had an excellent introductory session, I think, at the Libby committee. So the organization is certainly safe for the future, whilst I've been very happy and privileged to lead it in the last 9 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, for that presentation. Very interesting. Now, I've been told that the colleagues who wish to speak, your names will magically appear on the screen on the left. I mean, I'm happy with pen and paper and all of this, but see what I mean? They've not magically appeared. So now we have paper. It's called the backup, anyway, so let's see if I can read everyone's handwriting. So, so we start with Marietta Caramanelli from France, please. So colleagues, there's quite a few speakers, so quite brief and concise, and try a question as well. Okay, thank you.
Merci. Je voulais aussi
Thank you very much. I also wanted to congratulate you on all the excellent work that's been done, this very dense program of activities, the very interesting work that you've done in a number of different areas throughout Europe and beyond Europe as well. So I just wanted to thank you. With my colleague next to me, I said that we really could have given you a round of applause at the end of your presentation. I think we can give you a round of applause. Now, alongside that, let me just say that you've also stressed your capacity to meet the increasing needs for investment in the various activities you do through the budgets. Now, have your requests been made at the level of all member states of the European Union? Have you made those requests for increased budget? And also, you've also talked about the work that you're doing as far as information exchange is concerned and analysis of information is concerned. That seems to be the basic work that your organization provides at European level, information exchange and analysis. So, a question that is very specific concerns the data itself, this information, because I think that there was a request from the European Commission for you to be able to have, for them to have a negotiation with a number of countries. They'd requested information for countries outside the European Union, Turkey and Tunisia in certain areas. So could you give me more information about this request for information, that type of mission that you're given? And could you also talk to me about, or tell me a bit more about what you do as far as the operations in hotspots are concerned? So this is really at the second line of your activities, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So the names have in fact appeared. Could I just mention this is a very long session up to lunch, so I understand there is some coffee outside. Don't abandon the hall or anything, but there is coffee outside if somebody wants to get you some coffee, because it's quite unusually long and we didn't have a break. I'm not talking about myself, I'm just saying if you want to have coffee. Okay, so next is Mr. Metsu from Belgium, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wainwright, And please let me start by congratulating you as well for the past decade. You did an amazing job over the past 8-9 years. Big shoes to fill, but we are quite convinced that Ms. De Bolle will continue your great job. Now, almost 2 years ago, Belgium was under attack. We suffered a terrorist attack on March 22nd, 2016, and 35 people died. More than 340 persons from different nationalities were injured very badly. And we've noticed that the info sharing is crucial, info sharing in between key players. Now, last week, we visited Europol with our delegation. We were hosted very well. It was very interesting. Mr. Martinu was there as well. And he mentioned as well that 1 year ago, 85% of the information in Europol's database came from 5 member countries. So 15% was related to 23 member countries. And I think that this is still our Achilles heel, and we need to overcome and tackle this problem. I've heard you say, Mr. Wainwright, that you also state that our job is still not done. We need to convince one another to share all that relevant intel and information, because knowledge is power to overcome terrorist attacks and other crimes. So it'll take us too far, I reckon, to discuss this right now, but please note this as one of our major concerns in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Metsu. Now, Mr. Diaz de Mera from the European Parliament.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you to the co-chairs. I'd like to ask your permission to perhaps take a little bit more time at this juncture, as I didn't speak earlier on in the last round when we talked about the rules of procedure. I'd like to be a little bit longer at this stage, if I may, because my words are very simple, but I think that it's important that we pay real homage to the work that's been done by Rob, the director of Europol, at this stage. And I'd just like to explain why I feel so strongly about this. I was a rapporteur for the Council decision, which covered the legal actions of Europol. I was also rapporteur for the regulation, for the rules of procedure for Europol. And I must say that in this legislative process, I can only say that Rob was a very key player, a determining figure in these negotiations. In the 9 years that he's worked very fruitfully in Europol, I think he has achieved something which was a mere dream before he took up his office. He's enabled us to actually generate confidence in Europol. He's got the confidence of the member states, and he's shown great professionalism and great expertise in his work. As director to neutralize organized crime, and also working against cybercrime, and also in his actions against terrorism to help us combat terrorism. In these roles, he was excellent. And in the work against the illicit financial transfers. I know that there were some 17,000 different Siena measures. There was great work being carried out by the Guardia Civil in Spain, and I think the work that was done also at legislative level, which led to the regulation being passed, and the various conventions, strategic conventions, and operative plans that were carried out. The work against the falsification of the euro, which hasn't actually been mentioned yet today. I think this shows you the long list of activities that he's been involved in. There's a long list of etc., which show the professional work that this British director of Europol has actually taken on board. The regulation is based on 2 key pillars. One, which we mentioned today, is the pillar of parliamentary scrutiny. And I can only thank the national parliaments for their very generous contribution to this work. And under the leadership of the Council, Bulgaria, and also under the chairmanship of our parliamentary committee under the leadership of Claude Moraes, I think we've been able to show that we are set on a very solid pillar, that we're going to ensure that we have very good joint scrutiny of Europol. That's very important for us because we've got to make sure that we give legitimacy to the work that Europol is doing. But the other pillar of Europol is actually is data protection. So it's based on data protection, which is no more or no less than the very guarantee of the correct functioning of our law enforcement forces. Protection of data is what Europol is guaranteed by the protection of this data within which Mr. Butarelli's service is very strong. So what else do we have apart from the successes that we've scored on both fronts? I think we can only now say goodbye to Rob with great gratitude. And we've been able to close a number of strategic operations that he's been working on. And there's a number of things that we will be continuing to work on in the future. We saw the presentation of the work that we're doing on Israel, Japan, Jordan. There were a number of other countries mentioned that were on the presentation earlier. So I know that we have a lot of work in front of us. And my words, Mr. Chair, to conclude is this, that I think that having done so much in the past and with so much to do, I think it is unacceptable that we have such a small budget. It is unacceptable that we are supposed to function with this low budget. It is unacceptable that an agent which is so important, like Frontex, has twice the budget that Europol gets. I don't think that is fair. I think it's a good thing that Frontex has a good budget, but we feel that it'd also be good for Europol to have the budget that it needs to carry out all of these operations. Because as Rob has said himself, we need to increase technological capacity. We need a lot more technology, and therefore we need to have more means to enable us to achieve the goals that we have set and to conclude the number of operations that we're working on. So, Rob, good luck to you. We're going to miss you, and when the time comes, I will be able to extend a warm welcome to your colleague, who's going to no doubt replace you with it in a very effective way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Augustin. And to take up the concrete point that Mr. Diaz de Mera made, Rob, what could you do with more? You know, the issue of capacity and more budget and more size. Mr. Myrianthous from Cyprus, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We want to thank also Bulgarian presidency for the hospitality. Mr. Wainwright, thank you for your contribution in Europol, and we wish you every success to your future undertaking. I have two questions to ask. We share the widely held view that corruption is a major enabler of a host of other criminal activities, as indicated also in the latest street assessment. In spite of this, we noticed it does not feature much in the documents at hand. How does Europol intend to deal with this issue in the forthcoming years, and is information exchange and analysis on corruption among the priorities of Europol? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Ms. Caterina Cinici from the European Parliament.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Moraes, and also thank the Bulgarian presidency for hosting this meeting. I would also like to express my gratitude to Rob Wainwright for the guidance which he has given to Europol activities over recent years, encouraging cooperation and the exchange of information. They are both vital if we're to tackle the most serious crimes, which are by their very nature international: drugs trafficking, arms trafficking, people trafficking, terrorism. And I fully agree with Mr. Diaz de Mera in the comments that he's just made. We need to give full support to Europol activities. On the document, the draft presented to us today, I think one area is of growing importance, which is the strategy for relations with international organizations and more specifically with third countries. In that area, I do feel that it is important to stress that we need to ensure that we have checks on the quality of information. We need to ensure that there is data protection, personal data on EU citizens are secure, and so on. And that means more cooperation with third countries to detect serious cross-border crime. Of course, yes, we need the cooperation, but we need to be very, very careful about certain aspects, such as those I've just mentioned. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Katerina. And now Mr. Axel Voss, also from the European Parliament. Axel.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to Rob Wainwright for all the work he's done over the last decade or so. One cannot overestimate all the work that he has done. And I think we depend on you and depend on Europol. Europol is, I think its role sometimes is overestimated in terms of what can be reasonably expected, and there the financial aspect comes into play. It is very important indeed that all of us endeavor to raise the level of funding available to Europol that applies to the national parliaments, but also to the European Parliament and European decision-making bodies, which have to take this seriously. In my view, when it comes to terrorism, organized crime, which is spreading more and more, then cyber attacks, which are increasingly going to affect us. Europe is falling victim to these more and more often. We have to do more on all these fronts. So therefore, it's all the more important that we express, all of us, the political will to do something about this, to really address this issue. Then as regards interoperability, here too, it raises the issue of how this should work structurally and technically speaking, but also in terms of the quality of the input from member states, the quality of the data. That's a very important aspect too. So I just wonder whether one shouldn't have, for example, some harmonized approach to writing names. That can be quite tricky at times. In France, Germany, Bulgaria, perhaps we have different ways of writing specific names. So we need to, I think, bear this in mind. I think we need to see how we could address this issue or harmonize our approach. The next issue concerns in this federal structure of Europol, how can we develop an effective system that really works? Referring to my own country, which is also a very federal country, and we have problems as well in terms of this federal structure, making sure that all the information can be exchanged in an effective and timely fashion. So we need to ask, what can we improve? What do we need to improve specifically? What do we need to improve generally speaking, not just about financial aspects? And when we come to cybercrime later, perhaps we can come back to that point. But I think it's an issue too of the IT specialists. Now, if you look at the major tech firms, IT tech firms, the salary structures are completely different in the private sector as compared to the public sector. How can we attract people who will be able to provide right level of quality? this is a real issue. How can you attract the very best, the best trained, the most experienced people to a public body like Europol? Then, as regards money laundering, with the US, we have the TFTP program. We haven't, though, yet managed, and that may be necessary, to develop some European equivalent of this program, the TFTP program. So the question is, do we need it? Or is it enough to maintain the ongoing cooperation with the United States, which works quite well? So I think that would be important, too, to address this issue. How can we improve things? On the issue of data protection at national level, the national parliaments and the European Parliament sometimes perhaps overdo it slightly in data protection. When it comes to security, we have to be reasonable too at times and look for reasonable and individualized solutions for Europol as well, because otherwise, with these general principles, wide-ranging principles of data protection, it's not always easy to tackle crime as effectively as one might wish. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Ms. Vezel from the Netherlands.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Marius. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anneke Wezel, representing the Dutch Senate. We thank Bulgaria for its hospitality. I thank Mr. Wainwright for his clear presentation and for all the work Europol and Mr. Wainwright have done to combat crime in Europe. Mr. Wainwright told us there are still gaps in information exchange. Can Mr. Wainwright specify what he thinks can be improved? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Maria Grappini from the European Parliament.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to speak in my language. Vreau foarte mult să, în calitate de membră a Comisiei.
Thank you. As a member of the Libe Committee, I would also like to express my thanks for this event. And indeed, in the Libe Committee, we have organized many meetings with Europol. We have been able to put questions. We got clear, transparent answers, and I would like to thank and congratulate Rob for all the work he's done over the years. I'm delighted to see that the national parliaments are present, and I've made this point too in Strasbourg. No European agency can work really effectively unless it works effectively with the member states and third countries. If we look at Europol's activities and how we can improve them, and I'm delighted to see that a woman will be running Europol. That's great for gender equality, and I'm sure for effectiveness as well. If we want to continue improving the effectiveness of Europol, it's very important that the national authorities understand this point. Cooperation with Europol is not just an option, it's essential. If we look at the terrorist attacks in Belgium, well, clearly there was a failure to pass on information, and people had to pay for that with their lives. If we look at the multi-year program, multi-annual program, we see that there is the issue, of course, of data security or data protection, but we don't want this to be at the cost of security. Protecting data is important, but if I'm boarding a plane, I want to be sure that I don't have a terrorist sitting beside me or anywhere else on the plane. Then coming to migration policy, we have to be clearly aware of what we want to achieve in this respect. We need to be clear about this in Parliament. We need to protect the rights of migrants, but also the security and safety of our citizens. And I hope that the Europol leadership will be able to take on board the views of this group. in these issues. Thank you.
Stevens from the European Parliament.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to all of you. I'm quite interested in the future and current role of Europol in developing participation in EU operations and missions, and further exploring the potential for deploying staff to delegations, missions, and operations outside the EU. Perhaps Mr. Wainwright could elaborate a little bit about this aspect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helga. Now, Mr. Sarakiotis from Greece, please.
Dear colleagues, terrorist attacks in Europe and the eruption of terrorist activity in the MENA region have strengthened our resolve to cooperate at EU level so as to enhance our internal security. Cooperation between law enforcement authorities, including with trusted partners, is of utmost importance, especially when it comes to fighting the spread of radicalization, but also illegal migration, illicit trafficking, drugs trafficking, and other forms of organized crime. Having gone through the documents that you have sent us, it's clear that priority has been given to the southern neighborhood countries, which unfortunately are in the eye of radicalization and migration cyclone. Yet we have a lot to learn from countries such as Israel that have a long experience in the fight against terrorism, or Algeria with a long experience in de-radicalization. We have a lot to gain from cooperating with the authorities of countries that have a lot to lose from radicalization, such as Tunisia, whose terrorism industry is often targeted by terrorists. In political terms, EU member states of the South that are in proximity to the MENA region have a role to play in this effort. We have examples of regional cooperation with the participation of EU and non-EU countries, such as the Ministerial Conferences for Security and Stability in the Eastern Mediterranean, an initiative of the Greek Minister of Foreign Affairs aiming to promote cooperation also at the operational level. But looking at the list of priority partners, I have one comment. I was wondering why Libya, a country of central importance to issues of terrorism, migrant and drug smuggling, as well as a country of the southern neighborhood, is not on the first priority group. Is it because of the absence of counterparts due to instability in the country, or is there another reasoning behind it? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And finally, Mr. Ostojic.
Благодаря.
Croatia, please.
Thank you, dear colleagues. First of all, I want to say thank you to Bulgarian presidency and people who are organizing this conference. Second thing is, I am one of the witnesses, who knows exactly how Rob Wainwright was doing his job. And that's why I want to say thank you to Rob, and also I think so that Catherine will continue with progress in this area. My opinion is, that we are too slow. The plan is good, paper is nice, but thing is, that we don't have only gaps in exchanging of information. We have more gaps. 10 years ago, I was speaking with Rob, same thing, that liaison officer will come to Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, as well to Albania. Today, we are hearing, that they will be there. And if we have 10 years to discuss something, what is really necessary, because 7% of the top criminals are coming from the Western Balkan, it is very easy, to understand that we are too slow. And only what I want to say as a message, because this is solution. Accession period for all these countries who wants to come and become the members, full members of European Union, is only period when it's possible to make change in this area, to have national contact points, to respect impact priorities, to have liaison officers, and my message is very simple. It is necessary to press them. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. I'm now going to return to... Oh, sorry, Mrs. Svitanov, you have a final question.
Аз също искам да се присъединя.
I too would like to join what was said so far, so that we could have a thorough analysis of the multi-annual programming for the 2019-2021. And it's true what Rob Wainwright said. Work increased ninefold in the last 9 years. And in this multi-annual program, we have, again, a bigger volume of work to be done. Of course, we will need an additional budget for Europol to meet all these challenges. I'm really impressed that this program also includes a lot about cybercrime, because this is indeed one of the biggest challenges, and we'll have Commissioners Gabriel and King address us on this topic. We are all talking about the exchange of information, about how to increase the opportunities for a profound analysis of the threats facing the European Union on the basis of this information, and how to seek partners outside the EU. And I'd like to ask Rob about a very important topic in the EU, namely Brexit. I believe that when we talk about security, we should do our utmost to continue using one of the main providers of information for the EU, the United Kingdom. And I think that we should have a focus in the multi-annual programming for the period on this matter, because I see nowhere any assessment of the impact of Brexit. And as a former Minister of the Interior and as an MP, I do know what this intelligence and information means for the Member States and for the protection of Europe's security. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Svitanov. So, colleagues, before I return to Rob for his responses, I should also mention that within the consultation process on the multi-annual work programme, this will continue in Brussels in September, and the co-chairs will send out a letter asking for your further contributions to the multi-annual work programme. So if you've not had an opportunity to contribute today, or you would like to further contribute, then please do so in response to that joint letter which will go out. So I now return immediately to Rob for his responses. Rob, please.
Thank you, Claude. And firstly, to all of you, or many of you, Augustin Diaz de Mera and many others who said some very kind things about me. It's always nice to hear it. It's slightly uncomfortable hearing people talking about yourself in this way. In the end, I'm a public official, public sector official, not a politician, and also, you know how the British are with their sense of reservedness. But I still I'm very grateful for you saying these kind things. The reality, of course, is that in the end, I'm a temporary guardian of this wonderful institution, and I pass over responsibility for it, of course, to Catherine next. And we all do our work, good or bad. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and that's the only story that is relevant. That I work as well as I can and pass it on to somebody else, and my work is only possible thanks to the fantastic men and women of Europol that have supported me in this way, some of whom are with me today. And perhaps even more importantly, the support of the network that we've established through the member states and many other countries. And finally, thanks to the political support, which has been so important in bringing Europol into a more frontline position. And the political level in the EU institutions at the national level have been so important to us. Now let me go through the questions as quickly as I can. We had many questions. Ms. Karamanli asked about the budget. Of course, we have consistently made our request to the budgetary authority, which at the European level is a co-responsibility between the European Parliament and the Council. So yes, of course, Member States, also through the Europol Management Board, are aware of our requests. It's consistently supported by the Europol Management Board. But at the political level in Council, the story changes. Then, of course, the realities of fixing the EU budget as a whole tend to have the effect of pushing down our demands. And I understand in the budgetary process how difficult it is. So this is more a question about, in the end, the ministries of finance in our member states, in the end, having a more decisive final say on this than perhaps the ministries of security and justice. It was also asked by Mr. Sarigotis, Mr. Vezel, many others. The reality is that the nature of the internal security threats we face in Europe today, of course, have a global dimension, more and more. We have terrorists that are flowing from our region to the Middle East. The people smuggling problem is inextricably linked to the MENA region, especially. Cybercrime cannot be defined in European terms only, and so on and so on. That pushes Europol naturally, therefore, to establish a global information exchange network. And our legal basis has to adjust to that. But there are very important differences, of course, between our ability to share data within the European Union and outside. And many of you have talked about the importance of maintaining consistently high data protection standards, and this is at the very heart of Europol's integrity and its reputation. We cannot lose that. So when we talk about exchanging personal data with countries around the world, such as Russia and China and many others, then there are obvious challenges about how you can do this to serve the operational requirements of Europol but still meet our data protection demands. And of course, national and European parliaments have invested a lot of time in making sure that we have the right process through, in the future, also with the new Europol regulation, to conclude international agreements that have a so-called data adequacy assessment that are a major part of that. This data adequacy assessment and the new arrangements for concluding international agreements has not yet been tested. So we have a list of priority countries that you see. We are waiting, though, for the procedure to be finalized and implemented. I don't think we should take so much more time. It's really important that we fill very important, big information gaps. Our gaps at the moment outside Europe are in the immediate region of the European Union. We still don't have an agreement that can allow us to exchange operational data with Turkey. And that's a number one problem that we have today in terms of our information exchange with partners outside the EU. I could say the same about the MENA region and many other countries as well. So clearly the challenge for all of us is to fix this in the future. Also a question about the hotspot locations. Yes, we have deployed guest officers, so-called. We have recruited a pool of some 250 counter-terrorist officers from the member states who on rotation are being deployed to Greece and Italy to help, especially to identify suspicious movements of any terrorists through the migratory flows that are coming through the external border of the European Union. Mr. Metsu asked a very good question about exchange on terrorism. Indeed, only 2 years ago, most of our information was exchanged with just 5 countries, and that was not satisfactory. We've worked a lot on this. We've put a lot of polite, constructive pressure on the member states. Many political leaders, also in Parliament, have talked about the need to respond. At the time of the dreadful incidents in Paris and then Brussels, over 2 years ago, it was so-called intelligence sharing failures that became part of the narrative, and that has focused the minds of all of us since then. I can tell you there's been a fantastic response from the member states in this field. 2 years ago, at the time of the Brussels attacks, we had 6,000 intelligence entries in the Europol information system relating to terrorism. 6,000. Today it's 500,000. We've gone from 6,000 to 500,000 in under 2 years, thanks to the positive response of the member states. Of course, it's still uneven. Of course, it's not all 28 in the same way. It's a lot more than 5, though, that are today providing a very good level of intelligence. We need to still go further, particularly by accessing more directly the work of the counter-terrorist community in the security services and the intelligence. Mr. Diaz de Mera and indeed Mr. Voss talked about the TFTP program. This has been extremely important in responding to the wave of terrorist incidents that we've had in Europe over the last 3 years. Thousands, indeed tens of thousands of unique intelligence leads are being provided very quickly through this program to the investigators on the ground in Europe to quickly identify those that were responsible for these terrorist incidents. I believe TFTP has been one of the most significant pieces of legislation that the EU has introduced in the last 10 years to fight terrorism, without a doubt. And it's true that going forward we need to adjust that, I think, with an equivalent for the European Union, a so-called terrorist finance and tracking system alongside this. The agreement we have at the moment is essentially a bilateral agreement with the United States. It gives control, finally, in many respects, to the United States. But we are missing a major part of the intelligence picture because the current TFTP program excludes the possibility to monitor suspicious terrorist financial transactions within the SEPA region of the European Union. That's a huge area, of course. And whereas we have to apply the maximum possible standards of data privacy and protection, especially to EU citizens, of course, we also know that within our community we have tens of thousands of radicalized people who are EU citizens, who are responsible for the majority of the terrorist attacks that we've seen in the last 3 years. And if we cannot monitor also, therefore, terrorist finance movements within that community, then of course it's an intelligence gap. So I do believe that TFTES, so-called, should be increased in the future. Diaz de Mera also asked about what can we do with more capacity, and I think this is also what Mr. Moraes asked. In the end, on intelligence sharing, it's simply to adjust to the reality of how we can manage just the flow of 9 times more data. To manage it in a way that still allows us to provide effective operational support. With such an increase in the flow of data, if we don't have the right resources, we may miss an opportunity to identify a connection to stop a criminal activity, of course, if we're absolutely inundated by the flow. We might inadvertently not continue to apply the highest possible standards of data protection when we have so much quantities to deal with and not enough people to do it. So it becomes to the very heart of the way that Europol works every day. But to provide a more positive description as well, if we have a better investment in technology, we can transform not just the work of Europol, but how law enforcement sector in Europe can invest in modern technology like artificial intelligence in a very dynamic way so that we can have a completely different approach to identifying crime and terrorism in the future. From this will become many more operations. We have so many requests for information. There are, for example, on child sexual exploitation, so many requests that we cannot process in time because we don't have the resources. So the challenge won't be what will we do with more resources. That's certainly not going to be the first problem of Europol, I can assure you. Mr. Demetru asked a very interesting, important question about corruption as a priority. Maybe it does not feature strongly enough, I agree, directly in how we present this. I can tell you, though, that at Europol we see corruption not so much as a specific criminal problem, as an enabler of organized crime, especially. We see it as a constant feature of how most organized crime works. So, in fact, we are working, therefore, in this area, but as part of many of our investigations, where we would certainly investigate any leads towards corruption. And with that in mind, our work to strengthen and improve the effectiveness of money laundering and the anti-money laundering regime especially is so important. And I've spoken before about how this regime has become very ineffective at seizing criminal assets in Europe. And I think this should be a major part of our future. Ms. Chinichi asked about the availability of information towards third countries. I think I mentioned this under the data adequacy test also. Mr. Voss made a good point about the importance of the interoperability agenda in Europe. That's true. How can we attract possibly the best people from the technology sector when companies pay far higher rates of salary? Well, we do it with a compelling mission that we have. You can work in the private sector, in the tech sector, and do some interesting things, or you can work at Europol and help save lives. And in the end, we find that is a compelling narrative that is bringing many people into Europol from the police sector, but also from the IT sector as well. Ms. Wessel asked about gaps in information exchange, which I mentioned already. Can I also, towards her and her colleagues in the European Parliament, in fact, pay tribute to the way in which the Netherlands, as a host state, has served Europol so well in providing us with, which is a landmark building for the law enforcement community in Europe as a first point, but consistent support from the host state. And all of the institutions of the Netherlands should be applauded for the way in which they have supported Europol over this time. Ms. Stevens asked about the integration of Europol in third country missions. This is such an important area. I talked about the information gap, for example, in the MENA region. We have some very good opportunities through the EU delegations in these areas, and the idea that we are exploring is that there should be a Europol liaison officer attached to these delegations, to these missions, so that we have better access on the ground. In Libya, we are working with the mission, the EUBAM Libya, but of course, Libya is in a very challenging state, and there are effectively no partners that we can work with that have the kind of institutional control of that region at the moment that can help us. In neighboring locations such as Algeria, it's a very different picture, and I think with Algeria we have a good opportunity to really increase our capability in the future. Mr. Ostojic is right. I mean, he has experience of running a police agency. He knows that we have to be dynamic and flexible in responding to these threats, and we are too slow generally. So as a general point, I would agree with that. And finally, Mr. Svetanov asked me a question that every journalist asks me these days, of course, about the impact of Brexit. The only other personal remark I would give is that it's with some personal regret that I will be the first but also the last possible British director of Europol. I think Mr. Svetanov is absolutely right that we all should have an interest in making sure that the final negotiations produce an adequate solution on security in the future. The dimensions of the threats that we're dealing with, I said earlier, are international in nature. The way in which we've responded over the last 30 years collectively, we should be proud of the work we have all done. We have built the most cohesive, most well-developed, most mature capability to fight on an international basis against crime and terrorism, the best anywhere in the world by a significant margin. We should be pleased with that. Now we have such a coherent environment. Of course, we don't want that to be fractured or fragmented. So this is a very important element. Of course, it's for those involved in the formal negotiations to secure that agreement, and it's not right that I comment on the modalities of that. And it's certainly not right that I should be involved in those negotiations. I am not. But Europol has an interest in making sure that the instruments that we have built to make sure we have the best possible security cooperation across Europe will be maintained in the future, even after Brexit. I'm actually quite positive about the outcome of that, given the political comments that have been made by most of the lead actors so far. Mr. Chairman, sorry for taking so much time, but I hope I've addressed most of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rob. On this last question, I know the UK representative here, Clive Soley, Lord Soley, would have wanted to ask that question, so thank you for answering it.
Thank you, Chair. And perhaps first could I start by congratulating everyone on the agreement today, which I think is profoundly important, and on your work, not just here, but over the years. I've known you for many years, and I know how much effort you put into this, and I think you deserve everyone's thanks for it, along with all your colleagues, both in the European Parliament and in the individual parliaments. I think it's very, very important. The question I have really is, where do we go from here? I think this, what's been happening with Europol is a steady and very impressive improvement. And again, many thanks to Rob Wainwright for what he's done on that. You can see the development has had a very real effect on people's lives throughout the European Union and throughout the UK. And I say that, of course, because the UK will be a third country in the relatively near future. That is barring any miracles, and I have to say, sadly, I don't see any miracles occurring. I think we will be a third country. And therefore, we have to think very hard about how we manage the relationship on not just security, but obviously in the context of this conference today, profoundly importantly, on the issue of security and policing. We have to be able to find a way forward on that. I'm reasonably optimistic that Brussels and London will come up with what will likely be an international treaty of some type on the exchange of information, Europol, the European arrest warrant, and a group of those issues. It's not easy, but I think that will happen because it's very much in the interest of the UK and very much in the interest of the EU. I think along with that, and what we haven't perhaps done enough thinking about, and any comments on this I would be very pleased to hear, is what sort of institutional structure we'll need to make that work. Because having an international treaty can be quite rigid and can prevent the flexibility that you need in dealing with issues of this type. And I think we need to give some thought to that. It cannot be done in the context of the negotiations. The negotiations must be separate. And I think both Brussels and London would get very nervous if we all started to pitch in on it. But I do think we have to think beyond this, beyond that point at which Britain is no longer a member of the European Union. And questions then, which were touched on before, of adequacy and equivalence in terms of exchange of information are profoundly important. And I would then put one last point, which is also in the form of a question, perhaps for everyone here, is a way in which we can hold on to the very close relationship that there is between the EU countries, the European Union Parliament and the United Kingdom in terms of security and policing. Because if we don't hang on to that, we don't hold on to that structure and make sure we protect it, then people's lives in the UK and the EU will be at risk. And one of the proposals I put forward is that in the longer term, again, beyond the negotiations, after Britain has left and become a third country, we have a very close parliamentary link between the European Parliament and the British Parliament. In the British Parliament, we already have groups of parliamentarians who link up with individual countries. So we have a Belgian all-party group, we have a German all-party group, we have a Swedish all-party group, an Italian all-party group. And I think we might need to find a way in which we beef those up and make them more effective. And then I think what we haven't got, but we will need, is a strong group of parliamentarians between the European Parliament and the British Parliament. And the reason for this is is different to some of the other third countries and international organizations and so on. And it is that in all our countries, there is constant and serious debate, to our credit, on the balance between security and civil liberties. And they can affect the outcome of other discussions. So I think we ought to be discussing that, and any views on that I would very much welcome and would like to hear. And at sometime in the future, Claude, I might be bending your ear at over some period of time to take that forward. Many thanks.
Thanks. Thank you. I currently work for the European Parliament, but I think Rob's response, thank you, Clive, for this. I think Rob already kind of responded to the Brexit point. So, and thank you, Clive, for that additional information, which I think colleagues will appreciate. We're so far ahead of time at the moment that I'm not quite used to it. We were going to go to the point with the chairperson of the Europol Management Board at 12 o'clock, but we're well ahead of time, but we're going to just keep going. I'm not so sure about this Bulgarian thing of not having breaks and stuff, but it's everyone's happy, we keep going. So we now come to the exchange of views with Mr. Prit Parkner, the chairperson of the Europol Management Board. And colleagues, in accordance with Article 51 of the Europol regulation, the chairperson of the Europol Management Board is invited for this exchange of views. And just as a reminder, the debate takes place according to the normal formula, as we've had just now. And without further ado, I will give the floor to Prit for his presentation, and please get ready to ask whatever questions you have, and a very warm welcome to him to this meeting. So, Mr. Partner, please take the floor.
Thank you for the floor. Distinguished members of the JPSG, dear friends and colleagues, it is an honor for me as a chairperson of the Europol Management Board to address you at this second meeting of the JPSG. I am very grateful to the head of the delegation of the Parliament of Bulgaria to the JPSG, Mr. Tsvetan Tsvetanov, and the chair of the European Parliament's Committee of Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, Mr. Claude Moraes, their kind invitation. It is a pleasure to be here in Sofia, and I would like to thank the Bulgarian presidency for hosting the meeting in this beautiful city, and for the enjoyable dinner and heartwarming folklore performance which we were welcomed yesterday. I would like to say from the outset that the Management Board of the Europol looks forward to building a successful cooperation with the JPSG. In my speech today, I will focus on specific topics related to Europol's tasks in providing necessary tools for enhancing security and safety in Europe and beyond, such as interoperability, data protection, integrated data management, external strategy, and others. The Presidency of the Council of the EU has chosen to focus in particular on improving the functionalities and interoperability of large-scale IT systems, and introducing new ones, optimizing the exchange of information between law enforcement bodies. These priorities are indeed supported by Europol's strategic goals for 2016 to 2020. This is a highly complex endeavor from the technical perspective, as well as a challenging one against the backdrop of limited human and financial resources. Of course, besides Europol's capabilities, there are a number of information systems at the EU level that provide national law enforcement agencies with the relevant information on individuals. However, suboptimal functionalities of the existing information system is a still fragmented architecture, as well as gaps in data management for border control and security, led to several initiatives at the EU level that either directly affect Europol or relevant to its core business. In this context, a reference to the 2017 Commission proposal for a regulation on establishing a framework for interoperability between EU information systems is obligatory. In turn, the Board is keen on developing a more comprehensive and updated view on information management issues of strategic relevance. The Board's aim is to help connect Member States and the Europol's process to progressively achieve a truly integrated data management, supported by innovative and efficient solutions that guarantee, in parallel, high standards of data protection. Speaking of data protection, and without prejudice to the more detailed and expert opinion of the European Data Protection Supervisor, let me share you that the Management Board, at its past two meetings, discussed the implications that the possible applicability to Europol of the revision of Regulation 45/2001 would have on the agency's handling of the operational data. The Management Board considers it utmost importance to ensure the continued application of the Europol regulation for operational processing of personal data by the agency, and in this context welcomes and supports the actions taken by Europol and the Bulgarian presidency to ensure this continuity. I was very pleased to see the position that Mr. Voss from the European Parliament expressed in this crucial matter. Let's turn now to the agency's programming document, and more particularly to its multi-annual component. The multi-annual program is a key instrument which is implemented annually through the corresponding work programs. It sets out the agency's overall strategic programming, including objectives, expected results, and performance indicators, as well as a resources planning, including the multi-annual budget and staff. I submitted to you Europol's draft multi-annual programming 2019-2021. Therefore, we can say that this is a first full cycle where, in accordance with Article 12 of the European Regulation, the JPSG has been timely consulted. Before its final adoption by the end of this year, the draft program document 2019-21 will be reviewed. The Management Board looks forward to the possible feedback from the JPSG, to the opinion of the Commission, to the possible input from the JHA agencies. Also, we will consider any significant developments of circumstances which are occurring in 2019 may require adjustments to the Europol's planning. Speaking of more specific matters to which the Management Board has devoted continued attention, I should like to mention the reinforcement of Europol's support functions by bringing together its anti-terrorism law enforcement capabilities in the European Counter-Terrorism Centre within the agency. In the area of illegal immigration, to the hotspots approach, Europol contributes through the guest officers mechanism. This means that the Europol deploys law enforcement personnel seconded by the Member States' competent authorities to the hotspots established in Greece and Italy. The tasks are support to frontline screening and registration process by reinforcing the secondary security controls. After an experience of approximately 1 year with the deployment of guest officers, the Management Board assessed positively the effectiveness, efficiency, coherence, relevance, and the EU added value of the concept, and stressed the importance of ensuring the sustainability of the deployment. In this context, we welcome the European Commission's commitment to the continuation of the Europol's guest officer project through amending a budget for 2018. The Board looks forward to approving this as soon as possible to avoid the situations where the initiative should be downscaled or even halted. The growing number of projects and operational capabilities entrusted to Europol generate a tremendous strain of the agency's budget. Additional resources for the 2018 budget were requested to the budgetary authority, namely the European Parliament and the Council, to take into account Europol's growing tasks. Although the final budget 2018 experienced an increase compared to that of 2017, it fell short of matching Europol's widening scope of activities. For this reason, Europol presented to the last meeting of the Management Board the implications of the budgetary shortfall, or in other words, how it would be translated into deprioritizing a number of activities that would have been also necessary to add value to Europol's delivery of products and services. The Management Board expressed concern, emphasized the importance of preserving Europol's core business and activities, particularly in the area of information management, and invited Europol to work with the Member States to avoid any detrimental impact on Europol's core business. I was very pleased to hear Mr. Diaz de Mera and also echoed by Mr. Tsvetanov sharing this concern, and thank you for that. I refer to the need to progressively develop the integrated data management concept to ensure interoperability in an increasingly complex constellation of interrelated systems, and to do both while warranting the highest possible data protection awareness and standards. I have also referred to the Board's continued focus on the counter-terrorism, on illegal immigration. Other important files discussed by the Management Board have been the selection of the future Executive Director, and I wish to hold here to express the Board's appreciation to our outgoing Executive Director, my friend Wainwright, for his outstanding leadership and the Europol during the last 9 years. I was pleased to see how the 8th of March, on a recommendation from the Management Board and after taking into account the opinion of the Libe Committee, the Council appointed Ms. Catherine de Boll as the next Executive Director. As Europol's primary governing body and stakeholders' environment, the Management Board looks very much forward to the close cooperation with her to ensure that the agency meets the needs and expectations of the Member States. Now I will focus the Europol's external strategy for the years 2017 to 2020. As a way of introduction, let me please say that 2017 was a year of important milestones concerning the development of the external strategy. The new Europol regulation has fundamentally transformed Europol's external relations. The Lisbon Treaty transferred the competence for the negotiations of international agreements to the Commission acting on behalf of the Union, and foresees the need to obtain the European Parliament's consent before such agreements may be concluded by the Council. With the new regulation, Europol is able to exchange non-personal data with any third party, including private parties, where the agency sees it necessary to do so without a need for any underlying agreement. The same is valid for the receipt of the personal data by Europol from third countries, international organizations, and the EU bodies. The exchange of personal data based on Europol's existing agreements remains valid, and it is also possible, even without agreement in place, if the Commission has passed the adequacy decision on the level of data protection of any particular third country. There are a number of exceptions on this general rule, with the most notable being that where the Europol considers on a case-by-case basis that a particular transfer is necessary for a series of purposes, amongst which the prevention, investigation, detection of or prosecution of criminal offences, in which case it may transfer the personal data providing it observes some conditions. While the regulation provides for more flexibility for operational information exchange on a case-by-case basis, it also brings more complexity when it comes to the establishment of systematic cooperation, including the exchange of personal data. The global strategy for the European Union's foreign and security policy, the European Agenda on Security and the European Agenda on Migration, represent the basis of Europol's external strategy for the years 2017 to 2020. We are confronted with a complex and dynamic security threat, which is cross-border in its nature and also goes beyond the EU borders. Europol's external activities are and will continue to be driven by operational needs. In particular, they should serve the implementation of actions planned under the European policy cycle. Europol has three main objectives in these external relations. The first one consists in optimizing its strategic and operational network of partnerships with a view to ensuring a equal exchange of information, thus strengthening its role as an EU criminal information hub. This is achieved through the conclusion of strategic and operational partnerships in accordance with Article 23 and 25 of the Europol regulation. The second objective is to strengthen its role as a preferred platform for international law enforcement cooperation against threats related to the EU security. This may be done by encouraging and expanding the network of liaison officers attached to Europol, which play a crucial role in facilitating coordinated initiatives against serious crime and terrorism. The number of liaison officers from the third countries within Europol's headquarters increased from 55 in January 2017 to 68 currently. Only from the United States there are more than 30 liaison officers. The continued upgrade of Europol's main communication system, known as a SIENA, or Secure Information Exchange Network application. In 2017, almost 130,000 SIENA messages were exchanged with the third partners, representing an increase of 35% compared to the previous year. The advancement of the universal message format aimed at establishing the Europol exchange standard for law enforcement authorities to be used in case of system adoption or the development of new systems. The promotion of the Europol platforms for experts to allow for secure cooperation. In February 2017, there were 61 third countries represented on the EPE. Switzerland, Denmark, the United States, Norway, and Canada have each more than 100 members. Australia, Iceland, and Colombia have each more than 50 members. The third objective is to reinforce Europol's position within the EU security architecture in order to address external threats to the security of the EU by strengthening the cooperation with the European Commission and the European External Action Service, so as to ensure the proper exchange of strategic information and provide a joint analysis of threats of both an internal and external nature. In doing so, Europol would also assess the potential of temporary deployment of its staff outside of the EU and fulfill its role in capacity-building initiatives. The Malta Declaration implementation plan states the need to enhance information sharing between military and law enforcement capacities deployed in the region, including deconflicting and promoting information exchange and assessing the added value of involving specialized police forces. Europol established the Information Clearinghouse in order to implement this objective. To ensure proper functioning of the Information Clearinghouse, Europol maintains close cooperation, including temporary deployments and training with the Frontex, Operation Sophia, Eurogenfor, and Interpol. A joint management board meeting between Europol and Frontex is planned on the 4th of October 2018. On the 1st of May 2017, the management board endorsed the proposal presented by the Commission to deploy Europol liaison officers in the Western Balkans and tasked Europol to work closely with the Commission on a pilot deployment concerning Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Serbia. At its May 2017 meeting, the Management Board also adopted guidelines for the Europol's external relations, which provide a technical legal framework for the implementation of the regulation in this area. On the 13th of December 2017, the Management Board adopted a list of priority partners with which Europol may conclude working arrangements. The list of priority partners reflects the growing need of the Europol to establish cooperation arrangements with countries of the MENA region in order to tackle the current migratory flows and terrorist threats. The first priority group of the third countries consists of the following 8: Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, Lebanon, Tunisia, Algeria, and Japan. At its last meeting on the 13th of February, the board approved the model working arrangement establishing cooperative relations between the law enforcement authorities of third countries and Europol under Article 23(4) of the European Delegation. This model shall now be used as a basis for the negotiations with the Europol's future strategic partners. Following the adoption of the model working arrangement and the list of priority partners, Europol has entered the first phase in the process of concluding this type of arrangements, which do not foresee the provision of personal data from Europol to the third country concerned. Research on the first 8 priority countries is being conducted in preparatory for initial meeting with the country representatives. This research focuses on the law enforcement authorities in respective priority countries with the aim of identifying a central law enforcement authority that could act as a counterpart to a working arrangement with the Europol and would thus present all competent law enforcement authorities in the third country. Europol will formally initiate the contact process and invite the competent authorities of the first priority group to conclude a working arrangement with the agency. Due to limited resources, it will be a gradual process reflecting the agreed priority order. So far, a preliminary meeting has been held with the representatives of the Japanese National Police Agency and the Japanese delegations to the EU on the 2nd of March 2018. As you can see, Europol has experienced a number of changes concerning external relations, and we look forward to expanding our influence beyond the EU borders in order to ensure the safety of European Union citizens. In conclusion, I would like to underline that the essence of the Management Board's role is to ensure that the Europol provides continuously enhanced support to the law enforcement competent authorities of the Member States, a support that effectively reflects the operational needs and expectations. We see the JPSG as our partner in the common challenge of ensuring governance, stability, consistency and continuity for Europol in a rapidly changing operational environment. I thank you very much for your attention. Remain available in case you wish to formulate any question, and look forward to welcoming the JPSG representatives at the Management Board meeting to be held here in Sofia on the 3rd of May 2018. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Partner. Before we go to the members, I notice Commissioner King has arrived, and I'd like to warmly welcome him, and of course welcome Commissioner Gabriel, who I didn't properly welcome at the beginning, so welcome them both. And they will, of course, be speaking in the session after lunchtime. As we're so far ahead of time, just to mention also, colleagues, that we'll obviously just be taking an earlier lunch, and Mr. Svitanov will mention when that happens. I'm going to now hand over to him to manage the speakers list. Mr. Svitanov.
Я също искам да поздравя еврокомисара Кинг.
I would also like to welcome Commissioner King, who just joined us for our debate together with Commissioner Gabriel. And of course, we start with those who requested the floor. The first speaker is Joseph Maria de Bras from the European Parliament.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Partner, for your presentation. Well, with a view of the upcoming set of recommendations from the European Commission to the Council on the opening of negotiations for agreements between the EU and various countries of the Mediterranean and the Middle East, North Africa, Algeria, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia, Turkey. I would like to ask, do you know, or do you know that anyone knows if it is envisaged that this agreement between EU and those countries will contain provisions that will enable Europol to determine when information supplied by Israel stems from activities of Israel's authorities in by Israel occupied territories, and the other way around. Is it envisaged that the agreement will contain provisions covering the supply and request of information from Israel by Europol that will enable Europol to request information stemming from activities of Israel's authorities in the occupied territories? I think this is not a minor question if we want that Europol becomes a true defender and a reference for human rights. Thank you.
Благодаря. Нека да групираме трите.
Thank you. Let us now hear the questions of the three speakers who requested the floor. Now allow me to give the floor to Baron Clive Sowley from the House of Lords.
Thank you. I don't think I need add or say any more than what I did a few moments ago, other than to say, obviously, same question in a sense, please do think about the situation post-Brexit and how we handle the institutional problems arising from that. Thank you.
Благодаря си.
Thank you. And the last request for the floor is from Mr. Mark Angel.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Parkner, for this update on the external Europol's external strategy. My three questions deal with a better integration of Europol's position into the European security architecture. And one aspect is the cooperation with EU operations and missions, which you already mentioned and which was mentioned in the session before. You gave some specific examples. So what are the lessons learned from these examples? And you said that you will enhance this cooperation. So what will this enhancement be? And second, you mentioned also capacity building, and I believe very much in capacity building because it's important to assist our partners' capacities and fostering their resilience. So, but I read in the documents we were provided that this capacity building of Europol will remain very limited. So I guess the reasons are financial resources, or are the reasons human resources? And a third question is, when I see the priority lists, the countries, the first list and the second list, I see an important number of countries missing. For example, the G5 Sahel countries. These countries are, the European Union has a lot of missions there, and there's a lot of development going on there. And here we are very close to the nexus of security and development. And I was wondering why the G5 Sahel countries are not on the priority, first priority, or second, at least at the second priority list. Thank you very much.
Господин Партнер, заповядайте.
Mr. Partner, you have the floor.
Thank you for those questions. I think the first question concerning Israel and the relations with, I think, and I definitely hope that everything is done by the highest standards of our data protection. But I think somehow we have to also understand that cooperation between Europol and the third countries, and also how it's different information is provided, it's also responsibility for each country itself. And as it was mentioned also in my speech, that we are trying, or Europol is trying to find the appropriate agency which provides the general information in all the country. So we just have to do our best to find this one. And I think what concerns the Luxembourg's question, which was brought by Mark Angel, I think you asked a very exact, how to say, examples or a very good practice in this area. I think it's much more appropriate to give the examples by the Europol, but I'm pretty sure that also we have those one in the Europol. I think it's much more easy to address these questions to the Europol because they have, in operational level, much more knowledge than the management board. And what concerns the Brexit, I think the Brexit issue will be also on the management board table, but I think it will be in something next of the year or end of this year. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So colleagues, we move now to the final panel before lunch and the family photo. And this is on the exchange of views with Giovanni Buttarelli, the European Data Protection Supervisor. And we're going to get a video intervention by Mr. Buttarelli. And also with us today, you'll have noticed we have Mr. Wierzchowski, the Assistant European Data Protection Supervisor, who will speak, of course, following the video intervention. So if we're ready for the video intervention from Mr. Buttarelli, we can have this, if we're ready.
Honourable members of the European Parliament, honourable members of the national parliaments, it is a duty but also my sincere pleasure to appear again before the joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group, although remotely. As you know, we only started our role as Europol's data protection supervisory body in May last year. After almost 1 year, Europol supervision remains a core business in the context of the broader EDPS mission. In fact, our supervision on Europol constitutes a specific chapter of our annual report for 2017, which will be presented tomorrow at the Libe Committee of the European Parliament here in Brussels. This event is one of the reasons which impeded my participation in person today. I sincerely regret not being with you at this meeting, which I'm sure is going to be a fruitful and successful one. We believe that the Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group may play an essential role in politically monitoring Europol's activities. I'm not only referring to the fulfillment of the Europol's mission, but also to its activities' impact on fundamental rights and freedoms of individuals. I'm also confident that this group, after its startup phase, could also contribute to stimulate a more comprehensive debate on EU policy and their implementation in the area of freedom, security and justice. I greatly appreciated the tone and the content of the first constituent meeting in October last year. On that occasion, I briefly described the new EDPS approach to Europol supervision, and we steadily focus on the key concept of first accountability and then cooperation with national supervisory authorities, not speaking about an innovative approach. And we have been building precisely upon these three cornerstones. Throughout this first year, our supervision has been a substantial exercise. In addition to the handling of complaints and consultations, we conducted our first inspection in December last year. A second one is in the pipeline. We acted and intend to audit Europol together with experts from the national supervisory authorities so as to build on the previous experience we shared with them within the former joint supervisory body. Its legacy, let me tell you, is in very good hands. We ensured continuity and evolution with the JSB mission by focusing also on special categories of persons, sensitive data, data review, and also data retention. And further down the line, we aim to obtain improved auditability while not stifling innovation in the intelligent products and processes. We are committed to further developing data mapping and a fine-tuned methodology for data protection risk assessment that will accompany Europol's prior consultation request to my institution, the EDPS. Working in tandem with the Europol's data protection function has been and is key in that respect. Developing new technologies so as to keep the pace with new challenges of the different forms of crime is also key to Europol. And our supervision aims to ensure that this technological dimension is properly balanced with the need of having high standards of security and data protection for the individuals. The extent of our efforts over Europol remain, however, dependent on the related legal framework. I've been repeatedly calling for a speedy adoption of the new regulation for the EU institutions and bodies so that it would be applicable on the 25th of May, at the same time as GDPR. This timing now appears as difficult to be respected. However, a swift adoption of this regulation remains, in my view, key if the law wants to contribute to the consistency and harmonization of data protection framework across the EU. The new proposed regulation would encompass both administrative and so-called operational data. The EU legislators are in the last mile of an intense exchange of views on whether or not we should have a sole and only data protection regime applicable for EU institutions. As reiterated in many EDPS opinions, we welcome initiatives which seek to introduce more coherence and consistency in this area, along with a limited number of justified and specific provisions related to the so-called operational data processed by EU law enforcement bodies. We continue to support the principle of one law for all EU institutions and bodies, especially for administrative data, subject to coherent, specific rules applying to certain core business law enforcement activities. Indeed, we should not overlook the increased interaction in the form of exchange of information and personal data between police and justice institutional actors and those having administrative tasks. This trend would call for a reductio ad unitatem of the data protection rules under the umbrella of the EDPS supervision. The main and almost the only significant problem concerns the subset of the so-called operational data processed by, in particular, Europol, but also Eurojust and EPO, I mentioned above. And this is certainly a point of strategic importance. I hope that the co-legislators will soon, in the next few weeks, find a sound and balanced solution of this challenging but essential piece of legislation. What does the future hold for our supervision on Europol? First of all, we need to think and act coherently. The EDPS is advisor to the EU legislator and supervisory authorities of all EU institutions and bodies. We have an ideal position in connecting the dots and in identifying problems and challenges of common concerns to Europol and large-scale information systems. We are keen to develop this area of supervision on which so far we have constructively been working together with the national supervisory authorities. And international transfers from Europol to third countries and international organizations remain an area of paramount importance to which we continue to develop deep attention, as confirmed by the opinion I adopted on March 14 this year on the 8th negotiating mandates to conclude international agreements allowing the exchange of data between Europol and third countries. Let me conclude by paying tribute to the Executive Director of Europol, Rob Wainwright, and to his deep commitment to data protection. As Mr. Wainwright recently wrote, data protection is an opportunity to improve internal business process and enhance external level of trust. And this is also the way we work together, trustfully and fruitfully. I will give the floor now to my good colleague Wojciech Wieworowski, Assistant Supervisor at EDPS, who will further detail our supervision role on Europol and may reply to your questions on the spot. Let me wish you all an engaging and fruitful discussion, and thank you for your attention.
It's the concept of remote chairing. This is good controlling. So please take the floor.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That's a great pleasure for me to take part in this meeting today in Sofia, and at the same time to pay the tribute to the work which is done by the national parliament and the European Parliament in the supervision of Europol and the activities of the agency. That's also the very good moment to say my thanks to Rob Wainwright and his co-managers in Europol for the fruitful cooperation of last year. Let me just add a few practical things to what has been said by Giovanni Buttarelli as the summary of this almost a year of the supervision over Europol as far as the operational data is concerned and the core activities of Europol are concerned. Because we have to remember that EDPS as the supervision institution of the European Union had already have some supervision over Europol as far as the data of the staff is concerned and the internal solutions for the activities. Definitely we can say about three main parts of our activities that we did. First of all, this is the opinioning of different kind of guidelines, different kind of internal documents that are prepared inside Europol, as well as opinioning of the cooperation of Europol with third countries authorities. The second part is the everyday cooperation with the staff and the management of the institution, which is mostly done by the case officers in EDPS, together with the corresponding staff of the Europol. But sometimes we also supplement it with the everyday consultation between the management of Europol and EDPS supervisors. And the third part of this are the inspections. And the detailed information on what happened so far as these three topics are concerned, is included in the document which has been distributed to you during this meeting and which is a part of the annual report of the European Data Protection Supervisor that is going to be presented to the LIBE committee tomorrow. We also distributed some of our opinions and we are ready to provide you with additional information about the practical, especially technical solutions and technical details of our inspection work. We have to remember that, as it was said before by representatives of Europol, the main problem, the main challenge for now and for the future is the development of the new technological tools for the activity of Europol as a kind of hub, information hub, that should facilitate exchange of information between the police authorities and police forces inside the European Union. And definitely Europol information system is here, plays here the most important role, as well as Siena, but as well also as this Europol platform for experts, which Rob Wainwright was telling about in the past. The big challenge for us is the introduction of the interoperability scams inside the European Union as far as interoperability between the large-scale information system is concerned. And we are studying the proposal from the Commission, and we also are taking part in the consultation in this field, knowing that Europol, together with some other agencies, will become a kind of hub for these interoperable solutions that exist and that will exist in the nearest future. I also would like to point the very nice and open attitude inside Europol towards the supervision. I also will recall the blog post that was done by Rob Wainwright for the European Data Protection Day in the end of January, when he said about his enthusiasm for data protection that was developing throughout his work in the Europol. Even if these words are because of the European Data Protection Day, it's really nice to hear that for the representative of the law enforcement authorities, the data protection is simply the part of the normal activities and the part of the secure environment for the normal operation. We were always of the opinion that introduction of the new techniques, new tools, new technological solutions in the work of the law enforcement authorities in Europe is the must-be. It's also the natural development in history, and we are not going to stop it in any way. We only think about having it civilized and having it done in respecting the human rights and the fundamental rights that are observed in the European Union. I'm ready to answer the questions if there are any about the supervision of Europol. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There are 4, and we start immediately with Mr. Peterson from the European Parliament.
Thank you very much, Chair. Let me say that I think it's extremely important that we, in this scrutiny group, have the opportunity to discuss with the EDPS. As data protection is such a key issue in the new regulation, it makes a lot of sense that we have this opportunity, and I really think it's of major importance. Now, my question relates to the conclusion of international agreements between Europol and third countries. I think it's very important to ask the EDPS on this issue as well, and hearing the reflections from the EDPS on this, because when concluding agreements with third countries, it is important that we have the appropriate measures to protect personal data when cooperating with third countries. And my question to you would be, in your opinion, do we have the appropriate safeguards in place, ensuring that this takes place in an orderly manner? Because clearly the EDPS has also been somewhat critical on concluding these agreements. So if you would please elaborate a little further whether we basically have the right safeguards in place, and if not, what do we do about it? Because to me, this seems of vital importance, given the importance of data protection, and concluding, obviously, agreements also with third countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Ms. Coralie de Bost of the French National Assembly, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My question follows up the question from my colleague, Mr. Peterson now. Strategy number 2, as has been mentioned, means that Europol negotiates agreements with third countries such as Turkey and Egypt on exchange of personal data with a view to combating terrorism and people smuggling, but also smuggling of weapons or contraband goods. Could you perhaps clarify the role that the committee, the Commission and Europol play in undertaking these negotiations? Is it wide enough and not just confined to the most serious forms of terrorism, but also with an economic goal? So the first question is, why such a wide scope? Secondly, on the method, could you confirm that these agreements, in order to be validated, would need to be adopted by the European Union Council by a majority after approval by the European Parliament? We wonder how the member states, which retain ownership of the data they send to Europol, could object to certain information being exchanged with third countries, which they feel do not ensure sufficient guarantees in terms of rule of law. In particular, it seems somewhat theoretical in the negotiations remit for negotiations with Turkey that a number of bodies, independent bodies responsible for data protection, will have to follow up the use by Turkey of personal data, and will have to ensure that Turkey will not send this data to non-authorized third countries. Is it not somewhat illusory to think that a non-Turkish body of this kind could carry out investigations in Turkey and could carefully monitor the provision of this data in general terms, is the European Commission not in danger of going too far in terms of security by trying to ensure police cooperation with countries which do not share our democratic values? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Elias Miriantis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is something similar to the previous question. Regarding the drafting of agreement with a number of Mediterranean countries that will provide access to personal data, we must point out that a differentiated approach toward each country must be ensured in view of its particular political context. There are particular concerns regarding exchange of personal data, for example, with Turkey, not least in the context of the continuing state of emergency in the country and the ongoing range of critical individuals. How will it be possible to ensure that such an agreement will not become a tool of political impasse in the hand of impressive regime? Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, from the European Parliament, Mr. Axel Voss, please.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think all of us, I'll just give you a chance for your headset. I think all of us, we're all clear about how important data protection and the right to privacy are in the technological field. And I think we have a good balance here in terms of data protection. What I would criticize, and what perhaps the European level and at national level as well, are when it comes to our legislation, perhaps we stick too close to older principles and old approaches without taking sufficient account of the changes that have taken place in terms of digital technology. We need to take more account of this too. We want both at the same time, security and protecting fundamental rights, and in particular data protection in this context. Now, how does this play out in security terms? That's my question. Do these structures work properly? And this would be a question to Rob Wainwright in particular. Does this data exchange work in terms of data protection? And do we not need to speed things up? What are the hurdles we face? Is there too much bureaucracy in terms of what we have, the approach we've been following up to now? Can all this be done? Can this be achieved in terms of the security we need? Or are there certain things that you can't do in terms of data protection? My impression is, and the various inputs from our colleagues, our French and Cypriot colleagues, I think made this clear, there's a certain lack of clarity when it comes to security cooperation with third countries. And in this respect too, I think we need to develop further possibilities. We can't always assume that European data protection standards will be followed in third countries, but we still need to cooperate with them. So this is why I would raise the following question. In terms of service provision, in terms of being an intermediary and achieving the necessary flexibility, perhaps the data protection authority needs to look at new and innovative approaches as to what methods one can adopt to ensure that we can achieve security without undermining data protection. And I think this is very important. When it comes to security, we have to be a bit more innovative in order to balance these two requirements. One last question. In the trilogue, which on the relevant directive on data protection in the European agencies, we have a sort of blockage, I would say, between the Council and Parliament in terms of operational data and managing administrative data that applies to Europol, but also to Eurojust to the same extent. So perhaps it would be helpful to take account of the needs of the security authorities in terms of taking certain measures or imposing certain requirements so that we can meet everyone's needs in terms of data protection, but also ensure that the security services can work effectively on this basis. So I think the data protection officer can play an important role as an intermediary between these roles in terms of finding practicable solutions. So I just wonder whether one couldn't take further steps in that direction, ensuring security on the one hand, but also not neglecting data protection on the other hand. In my view, perhaps we, in the data protection regulation, we haven't taken sufficient account of new types of data and how you can work on personal data in a more effective way operationally, but not undermine the data protection. Perhaps one could try to find some way of thinking about new categories of data protections so that we can ensure better security through data analysis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Axel. Now we return to Mr. Wierowski for some responses, please.
Thank you very much for these questions. Let me answer these first three questions somehow together with all the details that were asked by the parliamentarians. Well, definitely, as I said, the exchange of data with the third countries is one of the main challenges for the future. We have to remember that our discussion about exchanging data with the third countries does not mean only that Europol is going to provide the third countries with the data which is stored on the European side. Actually, the main reason for doing that is to get the data on the other way. So to get the data from the third countries into the European Union. And we know that in all kinds of agreements like that, the famous word reciprocity is the key to the whole deal and to the whole negotiations that we are doing with the third countries. In the data protection world, when we start to think about the exchange of data with the third countries, we usually mean United States. We usually mean the big players like India, the big players like Japan. But we are forgetting the fact that the European Union countries are bordering with the third countries. And if you look at the eastern part of Europe, you will find out how many neighbors do we have and how many relations then we have between the countries like Finland, Poland, Hungary, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, etc., but also Bulgaria, also Romania, also Slovenia, and the third countries like Bosnia-Herzegovina, like Montenegro, like Serbia, like Belarus, like Russia. These are very different countries. Some of them are taking a lot of efforts in order to meet the standards of the European Union, like Serbia does, like Montenegro does. Some of them are not doing almost anything, like Belarus. Some of them have different ways of protecting the data, like Russia. It starts to be the same in the Mediterranean region. So we have very different countries, one from another. So it's true that a little bit more individual approach should be taken. Because we have a country like Israel, which is an adequate country. There is the decision on adequacy about Israel that has been taken under the directive that existed so far, but it's still valid. Then we have the countries which do quite a lot as far as data protection is concerned, like Morocco. But we have also the countries that were described here, where the situation is much more difficult. And all of them are the possible third parties to negotiate with. So the whole opinion that the European Data Protection Supervisor gave to the proposal of the agreements to be created with these third countries has many reservations, but it's not saying no to the exchange as such, because this is not the new phenomenon. Most of the countries that the participants of today's meeting are coming from have the same agreements like that with the third countries on the level of the country, on the level of the member state. And as it is with the European Data Protection Supervisor for the European agreements, there was the Data Protection Authority on the national level who was involved in opinioning process for these kinds of agreements on the national level. That is also the place where the national parliaments can play a vital role in showing how you can secure the data, how you can limit the way they are used if the agreement like that is created. Because this tradition of the agreements like that is not only for the last few years, this is the tradition that we have already for the whole time the data protection law exists in the European Union countries. So this cooperation is vital in the group that we are taking part in today, but also in the cooperation work that the data protection authorities do. You can see in the opinion that was signed by Mr. Buttarelli on 14th of March this year, that's the part of the documents that we delivered today, that points 4, especially 4.1, 4.2 and 4.3 are actually touching this problem. So the problem of purpose limitation, the problem of onward transfers between the authorities inside the country, and the special restriction or specific restrictions to be added to the solutions which are proposed right now. This is what the EDPS is pointing its finger on. But of course, there was I think the most important question that was asked was the one about the effectiveness of the possible supervision of what's going on in these countries. And here, once again, I have to say that there are significant differences between the countries. Because in Israel, whatever would be the opinion about the authorities in Israel, there is a well-established and well-working data protection authority that there is a long tradition of cooperation with, and who is, for example, the member of the Global Privacy Enforcement Network, which is the unofficial forum for cooperation of data protection authorities, also on the global level, exactly in the enforcement of data protection. We have Turkey with the new data protection law, which is quite different from the developments that we have in Europe. And finally, we have the countries where there is no typical data protection law and no authority to cooperate with. So I'm sorry to say that in the future, EDPS will be one of these institutions that will say about the fundamentals we have to remember about, and will ask the questions, is it the same situation in all these countries? And what can be mistakes to be done? On one hand, we would love to have case-by-case analysis by Europol of all the cases that, where the information is exchanged. On the other hand, I would agree with Mr. Voss saying that we have to create the system which is less bureaucratic and which is simply faster and efficient. But we have to remember that there were very bad examples in the past in passing the data from the law enforcement authorities to the third countries, like, for example, tax data that was sent to Belarus and then we used in order to oppress the democratic opposition in this country. So there has to be a kind of balance between case-by-case approach, which I would always stand for, and the efficiency of the data protection, of the law enforcement authorities. And this is the main point that we will be dealing with. And finally, there was a question about the trialogue on the new regulation that would exchange Regulation 45/2001. I have to say I'm in a very delicate situation because this is not the role of the European Data Protection Supervisor to say what should be the political solutions taken in the trialogue. As it was said by Giovanni Buttarelli, We are definitely in favor of having reductio ad unitatem and having one system applying to all the institutions, bodies and agencies in the European Union. On the other hand, we would be very keen on keeping all the good solutions that exist right now in the European law, and we think that the regulation on Europol has several solutions which are really the ones to be followed in the other institutions. So in this sense, we would like to have the solution of the problems we have as soon as possible, and at the same time, it's hard for me to advise more at the time the trialogue is done. I guess I addressed all the main issues that were in the questions. Maybe one more thing about the old principles being used in the new technologies and being used in the world of the big data. Well, I know these principles of data protection seems to be old, but they were discussed again and again and again, also in the whole process of the reform of the data protection law. And even if at the time of the big data, we have the problem with the principle of minimization or the principle of purpose limitation, which for those who are dealing with big data are ununderstandable anymore, I have to say that the recent information about what was going on in the activities of Cambridge Analytica for the purposes of the political reuse of the data shows that the purpose limitation and the minimization of the data is one of the key principles that we have to be stick to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, colleagues, we made it to the lunchtime and the family photo without a break. So thank you very much for your stamina and attention. And we've got a very interesting afternoon to look forward to, a very interesting debate then. And I'm going to now ask my co-chair, Mr. Svatanov, to conclude this morning and give you some information.
Skøpje gosti.
Dear guests, the work efficiently and well done gave us a longer lunch break. So, the lunch was initially planned for 1:15, but it will start at 12:30 and will last until 2:15, when we will have our family photo and we will resume our work at 2:30. The lunch is served on the 8th floor. We have assistants to direct us to the place, to the restaurant. Enjoy your lunch, and we will meet at 2:30. And for the family photo, please, everybody come at 2:15 to commemorate our joint event. Thank you.